I was 47 years old, and the highlight of my week was a cartoon about a giant robot. That probably tells you everything you need to know about the life I left behind. A one-bedroom apartment in Tokyo, a commute that ate 90 minutes each way, and a job so unremarkable I could do it with my eyes closed. I did some mornings. Nobody noticed, but late at night, with convenience store rice cooling on the desk, and the volume low enough to not bother the neighbors, I watched Apollon Kaiser, the absolute invincible robot Apollon Kaiser. To give it its full and deeply unpopular title, a mecha anime from decades ago that ran for 2 seasons before the studio went bankrupt. No streaming platform carried it. The Blu-rays were out of print. Fan forums had maybe 12 active users, and I was 4 of them under different names. I knew every episode, every attack name, every villain weakness, every transformation sequence, and the exact conditions required to trigger it. I had the technical manuals, the tie-in novels, the canceled model kits still in their boxes. If the world had a licensing exam for Apollon Kaiser, I would have passed it with a perfect score and then complained the questions were too easy. That night, the episode ended on a cliffhanger. The heroes were cornered. The mechanical giant Dogyu had ripped through the Earth Defense Force like they were made of paper. The pilots were launching their counterattack. I wanted to see the next episode. Instead, I turned off the television, set my alarm, and went to bed. I never saw the next episode. The next morning, I took my usual shortcut through the alley behind the station. Same route I had walked 1,000 times. Same cracked pavement. Same vending machine humming against the far wall. The ground opened up. No warning, no rumble, no cinematic crack spreading from one side to the other. One step was solid concrete and the next step was air. I dropped straight through like the city had simply decided it was done with me. I fell for what felt like a long time. Long enough to think, very clearly, that this was a stupid way to die. Long enough to think about the Apollon Kaiser cliffhanger I would never see resolved. And then the sky above me was not gray concrete, but open blue. And I was not falling down anymore, but being thrown sideways. And below me was green grass and a dirt road and a blonde boy lying face down next to a horse. I hit him head first, skull to skull, at a speed that should have killed us both. I woke up on my back in the grass. The sky was wrong, too blue, too clean, no buildings cutting the horizon. The air tasted like nothing I had ever breathed in Tokyo. My hands were small. That was the first thing that felt wrong. I held them up and they were a child's hands, pale and thin, with calluses on the fingers that were not mine. I sat up and looked down at a body that was not mine either. Blonde hair falling into my eyes, a nobleman's tunic, legs that barely reached where my knees should have been. Next to me on the grass lay a middle-aged Japanese man in a rumpled suit. He had no pulse. His eyes were open and he looked mildly surprised, which felt appropriate. That was my body, my actual body, the one I had lived in for 47 years, lying dead in a field in a world I did not recognize. A servant came running from the direction of a nearby estate, shouting a name I had never heard before. He called me Lord. He assumed the dead man was an assassin. He kicked my old body, which I found harder to watch than I expected, and then he carried me toward a mansion on the hill. I said I could not remember anything. It was the only move that made sense. The boy whose body I now occupied had fallen from his horse and cracked his head. Amnesia was plausible, and until I understood where I was and who these people were, keeping my mouth shut seemed like the smart play. A doctor checked me over. Small bump on the head, nothing serious. My old body was buried in an unmarked grave behind the stables. Nobody held a service. Nobody asked questions. I had been someone for 47 years. Now, I was someone else. The adjustment period was shorter than you would expect. The boy's name was Adrian, heir to Ironhold County. His father was the Count. His mother was a woman named Cordelia, who looked at me the way you look at a stain on good furniture. His younger brother Fritz treated me like a rival who had already lost. I spent a year in that house, learning how to be someone I was not. The language came first. They spoke something close enough to what I knew that I could piece it together, but the writing system was different, and the formalities were endless. I pretended to relearn everything from scratch, which the household attributed to the head injury. Nobody questioned it too hard. The original Adrian had apparently been quiet and withdrawn. on, so my silence was not suspicious. I trained in swordsmanship because I had nothing else to do and a child's body that needed building up. I studied the histories and the geography because I needed to understand the map I had been dropped onto. I learned about the skill system. At 13, every person received a divine ability during a ceremony at the local church. The Ironhold family had received fire magic for generations, medium grade, occasionally large grade. It was their identity, their value to the kingdom. Cordelia's hostility never softened. She watched me the way a cat watches something it intends to knock off a shelf, just waiting for the right moment. Fritz stole my food when the servants were not looking and smirked about it afterward. The Count was simply absent, not cruel, not kind, present in the way furniture is present. I did not mind. These were not my people, and this was not my fight. I was a 47-year-old man watching a family drama through a window. I had survived worse. 3 decades of corporate politics had given me a tolerance for petty hostility that no 13-year-old could match. I waited for the ceremony. The ceremony was held at the church in the county seat on my 13th birthday. The whole family attended. Cordelia wore her finest dress. Fritz stood beside her with the expression of a boy who already knew the outcome. The Count stood at the front with his arms folded and his jaw set, as if preparing to be impressed. The priest performed the rites. I stood at the altar and felt something settle into my body, like a key turning in a lock I did not know I had. A warmth spread from my chest to my hands, then faded. The priest examined the result. Everyone expected fire magic. Medium, maybe large, a worthy heir for Ironhold County. The priest read the skill aloud, and for a moment, nobody moved. Then murmurs, then confusion, then silence. Because the words he spoke were not fire magic, not wind magic, not any skill that anyone in this world had ever seen or heard of, or could begin to explain. The absolute invincible robot, Apollon Kaiser. I stopped breathing, not because I was afraid, because I knew that name. I knew it better than I knew my own. The Count's face went from expectation to confusion to cold fury in about 3 seconds. He declared me a disgrace to the family name. He used words I will not repeat, not because they hurt, but because they were unimaginative. A man disowning his own son should at least be eloquent about it. Cordelia smiled. Not a cruel smile, not a triumphant one, a relieved one, like she had been waiting for this specific excuse, and it had finally arrived. The skill was irrelevant. I understood that even then. She had wanted me gone long before today. This was just the door she had been looking for. Fritz helped himself to my sword, my money, and every piece of equipment I owned. He announced each item as he took it, like a child unwrapping gifts on someone else's birthday. I let him. A sword I barely knew how to use, and a purse of coins I had not earned were not worth a fight. They told me to leave immediately. I left before dawn. My pockets held a skin of water, a wrapped portion of bread, and 3 objects from a world that no longer existed. A smartphone with a dead battery, a wallet full of currency no one here would recognize, and a wristwatch that still kept Tokyo time. I had hidden them outside the manor on my first day, the way a man hides a passport in a foreign country, just in case. The road out of Ironhold County was quiet. No one came to see me off. No one called after me. The guards at the gate barely looked up. I was a disgraced child walking into the dark, and the only remarkable thing about me was how little anyone cared. I did not look back, not out of pride, not out of pain. I simply had no reason to. That house, those people, that year of careful pretending were behind me now. Ahead was something I had not expected and could not entirely believe. The skill was real. Whatever force governed this world had reached into my history, pulled out the one thing I cared about more than anything else, and handed it to me as a divine ability. I did not know what that meant yet, but I knew more about Apollon Kaiser than any person who had ever lived in this world or the last. If the skill worked the way the anime did, if the power progression followed the same logic, if the techniques unlocked in the same order, then at the end of that road was something no one in this world was prepared for: a giant robot. The thought was absurd. I was a 13-year-old boy with no money, no weapon, and no family, walking a dirt road in the dark toward a city I had never visited. But I was also a 47-year-old man who had just been handed the only exam he had ever been perfectly qualified to take. I kept walking. Ashenvale was louder than I expected. A trade city at the northern edge of the Leafrid Kingdom, built where merchant roads crossed and money changed hands. Stone walls surrounded a market district that never seemed to quiet down. Carts of monster hides and crates of magic stones moved through the streets alongside farmers and soldiers and children running between the stalls. The Hunter Guild sat near the center of town, a wide stone building with a counter at the front and a board of posted jobs covering the far wall. I walked in, and a receptionist looked up at me with the patient expression of someone who dealt with overconfident children on a daily basis. I registered under one name, Adrian, no family name, no title, no county. The receptionist wrote it down without comment. She explained the ranks: G at the bottom, SSS at the top. One person in the entire world held SSS. Nobody held SS. 8 people held S. Everyone else was somewhere in between, and most of them would never climb past D. She handed me a card, G rank Hunter, the lowest rung. She told me not to lose it because it doubled as identification, and she told me not to overreach because I only had one life. I thanked her and walked toward the northern gate of Ashenvale, where the hunting grounds began, and the slimes were thick enough that even a child with no weapon could earn a day's food. The first day of my new life smelled like dust and cheap leather and something cooking on a cart I could not afford. I walked through the gate and into the grasslands beyond the wall. Somewhere in the distance, a slime glistened in the morning sun. I rolled up my sleeves. The slimes were worse than I expected, not harder, worse in the way that a vending machine is worse than a restaurant. I punched the first one and it stopped existing. No goo, no membrane, no harvestable residue, just a marble-sized magic stone sitting in a patch of wet grass where a monster used to be. I punched the second one, same result. By noon, I had killed over 1,000 of them and had nothing to show for it except a sack of magic stones and a fist that smelled like cleaning solvent. Kaiser Punch was designed to crack through the armor plating of a 50-meter mechanical giant. I was using it on creatures that weighed less than a house cat. It was like bringing a wrecking ball to an egg-cracking contest, and the eggs were not surviving. The guild clerk stared at my pile of 1,249 stones like I had dumped something illegal on his counter. He counted them twice, paid me 624,000 lirug. Then he leaned forward and said, very carefully, that most hunters also brought back materials: fur, goo, horns, things the guild could actually sell to craftsmen. His tone carried the specific disappointment of a manager discovering that the new hire had technically completed the assignment while ignoring the entire point of it. I told him I would work on it. Horn rabbits were next. Fast little things with a single spike on their foreheads, worth decent money for the fur and the horn itself. I found a warren of them in the tall grass beyond the slime fields, crouched low, measured my swing, and threw the lightest punch I could physically manage. The rabbit vaporized. I tried again. Even less force. It still vaporized. The horn, the fur, the meat, the bones, all of it gone in a puff of heat and displaced air. Only the magic stone survived, rolling to a stop in the dirt like a dropped marble. 1,785 of those marbles later, I walked back to the guild with another sack and 0 materials. The clerk did not lean forward this time. He just sighed, counted the stones, and slid 1,785,000 lirug across the counter without a word. His disappointment had a specific flavor, not anger, resignation. The look of a man watching someone drive a luxury car through a mud pit every single day, knowing they would be back tomorrow to do it again. Iron turtles changed the math. 5 meters long, armored in biological iron that the whole continent used for weapons and armor. I found them sunbathing on the mudflats north of the city, dozens of them lined up along the shore like parked trucks. Kaiser Punch cracked through the body, but left the shell mostly intact. The turtle died. The shell survived. For the first time since I started hunting, I had actual materials to sell. I tested Kaiser Kick next. Too strong. The shell shattered into fragments. Kaiser I-Beam melted it into slag. So I stuck with the punch, calibrated the exact force that killed the turtle without destroying the merchandise, and repeated it 786 times over the course of a single day. 83 million lirug. The man behind the buying counter was named Garrett. He had been processing my stones from the beginning, but this was the first time he looked at me like a colleague instead of a curiosity. My output put me at C rank equivalent, he said, even though the paperwork still read G. The official promotion would come at the start of next month. He suggested I buy proper armor, take a rest day, maybe acknowledge that a 13-year-old body had limits, even if the mind inside it did not. I thanked him. He was the first person in Ashenvale who talked to me like he meant it. Not because of my family name, not because of my rank, because I showed up every morning and did the work. I took the day off, bought clothes, camping gear, a steel sword I did not need, and leather armor I would probably never use. The weapons shop owner tried to upsell me to turtle iron plate, but the prices had doubled since last month. He blamed the dark dragon. Apparently, the thing woke up every few centuries, and suddenly, every noble on the continent remembered they had let their military equipment rot in storage. Demand spiked, supply collapsed. The entire market was scrambling, and the only person profiting from the chaos was the kid who had been farming turtle shells for weeks. I filed the dragon away. A threat that scared the entire economy into panic buying was worth tracking. Over the next 2 weeks, I ground iron turtles until the guild hinted I was single-handedly depressing the shell market. Reached level 60. The skill tree offered a new unlock, finger missile. In the anime, it was a precision weapon, clean, surgical. I figured it might solve the material problem. I tested it on a mudwater cow standing knee-deep in the eastern swamp. The cow exploded, not vaporized the way slimes did, exploded. Pieces of it landed in the trees. A chunk of something I did not want to identify hit the water 30 meters away. I stood in the silence that followed, looked down at the magic stone sitting in the mud at my feet, and sealed the skill on the spot. Finger missile was designed for punching through the reinforced hull of a battleship-class machine beast. Using it on livestock was not hunting. It was an accident report. Garrett suggested I try the Ridgemark Mountains instead. Golems, he said, made of rock and ore. Difficult to shatter, easy to sell. He was already thinking about my problem before I had to explain it. The Ridgemark Mountains were a mining graveyard, rich in ore, crawling with golems 5 to 10 meters tall, and completely abandoned by anyone sane enough to value their own life. I punched the first golem and it crumbled into rubble and raw metal. Kaiser I-beam worked better here. The heat carved through the stone body without scattering the ore the way the punch did. I spent the full day cycling between the two techniques, dropping golems one after another until the sun dipped behind the peaks and the shadows swallowed the trail. The assessor at the guild weighed my haul and told me the ore needed smelting before they could price it. The magic stones alone paid 100,000 lirug each. I left the ore for appraisal and walked back to the inn with dust in my hair and gravel embedded in my boots. A month of hunting, billions of lirug sitting in the guild's banking system under my name, and I was still sleeping in a beginner inn, eating the same stew every night. Living like the salaryman I used to be, except the commute involved flying, and the quarterly targets involved killing things. Some habits outlast the world they were built for. The sword came out of the dark on my left side. Fast, professional. The blade caught the lamplight for a fraction of a second before it hit my neck. I felt the pressure, the way you feel a strong gust of wind against your collar, but the edge did not cut. The orichalcum dragged across my skin and snagged on my shirt, slicing the fabric clean through without leaving a mark on the body underneath. The man behind the sword was mid-20s, broad-shouldered, carrying himself like someone who had done this before. C rank based on his movement. He stared at the undamaged skin where his blade had connected, and the certainty drained out of his face like water through a cracked cup. "Someone paid you," I said, not a question. He recovered faster than I expected, swung again, full force, both hands on the hilt, aiming for the shoulder. The blade bounced. The impact shivered up his arms, and he stumbled back a step, fingers white around the grip. I caught the sword mid-recovery and punched it at the midpoint. The orichalcum snapped with a sound like a bell cracking. The top half spun through the air. I snatched the broken tip before it hit the ground and slipped it into my bag. Orichalcum was the most expensive metal in the kingdom. No reason to waste it. The hunter looked at the broken hilt in his hand, then at me. Whatever the job was paying, it was not enough to cover the cost of the sword he had just lost. He turned and ran without another word. I stood in the alley for a while after he left. The anger I expected did not come. What came instead was quieter, a calculation. Orichalcum swords were not standard issue for hired muscle. Someone with money had placed this order, someone who wanted to send a message and could afford to lose a fortune doing it. The list of candidates was exactly 2 names long, Fritz and Cordelia. They had spent enough money to buy a small house, trying to scratch a boy they had already thrown away. All they managed was a torn shirt. I tossed it in a waste bin on the way back to the inn. Meanwhile, back at Ironhold County, the Count was scrambling to buy turtle iron armor at double market price for the coming dragon crisis, the same crisis that was filling my bank account every single day. I did not plan the irony, but standing in the quiet of my room at the beginner inn, the broken orichalcum tip cool and heavy in my palm, I appreciated it more than anything else that had happened since I fell into this world. Garrett was the one who told me about her. He said it the way he said everything, with his elbows on the counter and his voice low enough that the hunters behind me could not hear. There was a girl, former princess, exiled from the Rosewind Kingdom for the same reason I had been exiled from Ironhold. Strange skill. No one could explain it. She had been killing slimes in the outer fields for months, selling 20 a day just to eat. The other hunters called her the Garbage Princess. She works harder than anyone in this branch, Garrett said, and she has absolutely no idea what she is holding. I asked him what her skill was called. He leaned closer, and his voice dropped to something between a whisper and an apology, like he knew the name sounded ridiculous and wanted to cushion the impact. He told me. Everything in the guild went quiet. Not actually. The hunters were still arguing over prices, and the front desk was still stamping forms. But inside my skull, every sound died, because the name Garrett had just said was not gibberish. It was not some random fantasy world nonsense that happened to sound like Japanese. It was a real name, a specific name, from a specific show, the same show, Sexy Lady Robo Beauty 4, the support mecha from Apollon Kaiser, Episode 12, First Deployment, piloted by Anna Tojo, the 18-year-old double heritage ace pilot who spent 63 episodes saving the main character's life with surgical precision repairs, and a left hook that could dent a battleship's hull, the other half of the Kaiser system. In my previous life, I had owned the limited edition Beauty 4 model kit, 37 centimeters tall, one of 800 produced. I assembled it in one weekend and cried when the left arm snapped during panel lining, and someone in this world had it as a skill. "Bring her in," I said. Garrett brought her to the counter the next morning. She was small, shorter than me, which was saying something given that I was 13 and had not exactly been fed like a prize horse during my year at the Ironhold estate. Thin in the way that told you meals had been irregular for a long time. She wore a faded hunting tunic that had been patched more than once, and her boots were held together with what looked like hope and maybe some amateur leatherwork. But her face. Her face was the problem. She looked like Anna Tojo. Not vaguely, not in the same ballpark. She looked like someone had taken the character design sheet from the anime and aged it down 4 years. The same wide-set green eyes. The same pale blonde hair that fell just past her shoulders. The same expression, a kind of quiet stubbornness that said she had been knocked down recently and had decided, without telling anyone, that she was done falling. My 50-year-old brain registered 2 things at once. First, this was extremely inconvenient because I was trapped in the body of a 13-year-old, and the last thing I needed was my childhood crush walking into my guild. Second, none of that mattered because what this girl was carrying inside her was worth more than every magic stone I had ever collected. Her name was Helena. She introduced herself with a small bow and could not meet my eyes. And when Garrett gently told her to explain her skill, her hands curled into fists at her sides. She did not want to say it. The name had been the thing that destroyed her life. "It is Sexy Lady Robo Beauty 4, she said, and the words came out like she was pulling teeth. I do not know what it means. No one does. The church said it was meaningless. My family said I was defective. The Rosewind royal family. Wind magic for 6 generations. And this girl, their 3rd princess, had stood in the ceremony hall at 13 and received a skill that sounded like a bad joke. They stripped her title the same day. She left the palace with nothing. She had been in Ashenvale for months. She had learned early that the streets were not safe for a girl with no family and no protection. She slept in cheap inns when she could afford them, and worse places when she could not. She killed slimes with a sword because her skill did not seem to do anything. and the other hunters let her know every single day how little they thought of her. And the whole time, she had been walking around with one of the most powerful support mechas in anime history sitting dormant inside her, waiting for someone who understood the activation sequence. "I know what your skill is," I said, "and it is not meaningless." Her head snapped up. The stubbornness in her eyes cracked open, and what was underneath was so raw it was hard to look at. Hope, the ugly, desperate kind that had been beaten flat so many times that it barely knew how to stand upright anymore. "Will you teach me?" She was not begging. She was asking, which was harder. Yes. The training problem was simple. Helena's skill operated on logic from a world that did not exist here. Every other skill in this kingdom had documentation, manuals, centuries of accumulated knowledge passed from master to student. Helena's had none of that because its source material was an animated television program broadcast on a different planet. I could not tell her that, so I lied, carefully, specifically, and with enough detail that the lie sounded like forgotten history instead of improvised fiction. "There is an ancient myth," I said, "about giant metal golems, not like the stone golems in the mountains. Metal, taller than castle towers, piloted from the inside by a human who sat in a chamber behind the golem's chest. The pilot controlled the golem's arms, legs, weapons, everything. The golem was the body, the pilot was the mind." Helena was listening the way a drowning person listens to someone describing land. "Your skill is the golem," I said. "You are the golem. When you fight, you are not a girl throwing a punch. You are a pilot commanding a 50-meter war machine to throw its fist. When you kick, the war machine kicks. When you repair, the war machine's maintenance system activates and rebuilds whatever is broken. But none of it works unless you believe completely and without reservation that you are piloting that machine. Every second, every fight, every moment of every day." She stared at me. I could see her turning it over, fitting the explanation against the empty space where her skill had always been, a space that no one had ever tried to fill. "Show me," she said. I walked to the nearest slime, planted my feet, threw Kaiser Punch with the full visualization, the cockpit around me, the targeting reticle, the hydraulic systems cycling through the motion. The slime ceased to exist. The magic stone bounced twice and came to rest in the grass. "Your turn." Helena stood in front of a slime. She closed her eyes. I watched her breathe, once, twice, and on the third breath, something shifted in her posture. She was not standing like a scared girl anymore. She was standing like someone who had just found the floor after weeks of floating. Her fist came forward, not fast, not powerful, but the air around her knuckles rippled, and when she connected, the slime burst apart, and a magic stone skittered across the ground. She opened her eyes, looked at her hand, looked at the stone, looked at me. "Lady Punch," I said. That was Lady Punch. Her skill status had updated. I could tell because her eyes were moving, reading something only she could see. Lady Punch, Lady Kick, Repair Kit. 3 abilities, unlocked in one moment, after months of nothing. She started crying, not the dramatic kind, not the collapse to the knees kind that they draw in manga. She just stood there with her fist still raised and tears running down her face. And she did not wipe them away because her hands were shaking too hard to be useful. And now a magic stone was sitting in the grass in front of her, proof that she was neither broken nor worthless, and she did not know what to do with that information. I gave her my handkerchief. It was cheap, the kind they sold at the general store for 200 leirug, and she held onto it like it was made of gold. "There is one more thing," I said. "The golems had a particular way of moving, specific poses that activated specific systems." I showed her. The Kaiser Punch form, the kick form, the I-beam pose, both hands forming a V near the eyes. She copied each one, stiff and self-conscious, and I watched the embarrassment fight the determination on her face. "This is somewhat undignified," she said. "It is," I agreed. "It works anyway." She smiled. Small, unsteady, still wet from the tears, but real. "We killed slimes until evening, 1,678 of them. Her punches got cleaner, her kicks got faster, and by the last hour, she was posing without thinking about it. The stones filled 2 sacks. Garrett processed the haul without comment, but his eyebrows said everything. When the coins were counted, he set down his pen and looked at both of us with the expression of a man who had been waiting for a particular domino to fall. "Have you considered forming a party?" he asked. He said it casually, but Garrett did not say anything casually. He had planned this, the introduction, the training, the suggestion. He had watched both of us struggle alone, calculated the obvious answer, and walked us straight to it without ever making it feel like his idea. Helena looked at me. The uncertainty was back, just a trace of it. The instinct that said good things did not last, and offers came with conditions. Partners, I said. Not student and teacher, partners. The uncertainty died. What replaced it was something I had never seen from her, a straightness in her spine and a clarity in her eyes that belonged to someone who had just been told they were allowed to stop surviving and start building. Partners, she said. Garrett stamped the forms. Flight training was the part that surprised me. I had been flying for weeks using the Apollon-Kaiser skill, Mach speed in theory, nowhere near that in practice, but fast enough to cover the distance between Ashenvale and the Ridgemark Mountains in under an hour. Helena should have been slower. She was lower level, newer to her skill, still learning the visualization basics. She was not slower. The Rosewind Kingdom was wind magic royalty. 6 generations of aerial combat specialists. Helena had grown up watching her family cut through storms, and even though her own magic had never manifested in the traditional way, the instinct was in her blood. The moment I explained that Beauty 4 could fly, she took off like she had been waiting her whole life for someone to give her permission. Still slow, I said, because I was her teacher, and honesty was part of the job. She laughed. It was the first time I had heard her laugh. The wind caught it and carried it behind us, and for a moment the sky over Ashenvale felt like it belonged to someone other than the guilds and the nobles, and the people who had told both of us that we were nothing. We fell into a routine. Mornings were training, afternoons were hunting, golems in the mountains mostly, because the Dark Dragon crisis had driven ore prices through the ceiling, and every stone we brought back was worth more than the week before. Evenings were dinner at the Golden Spoon, a restaurant with no dress code and a dessert menu that Helena worked through systematically, 1 item per night. She preferred anything with cream. I preferred the fact that someone was sitting across from me. The posing never stopped being embarrassing. We had to maintain the visualization constantly, living our daily lives as if we were piloting 50-meter war machines through every mundane activity. I had been doing it for weeks by now and had gotten used to it. Helena had not. Watching her walk through the guild lobby with the rigid, purposeful stride of a combat mecha, pausing at doorways to angle her shoulders like she was adjusting for hull clearance, was the funniest thing I had witnessed in either of my lives. She caught me watching once. The tips of her ears went red. "You are doing it correctly," I said. "I know," she said, and walked into the doorframe. We were walking back from the guild when I felt the needle. It hit my neck, right below the jaw. A tiny prick, barely noticeable, the kind of thing you would mistake for an insect bite if you were not paying attention. I reached up and pulled it out. A thin metal dart, no longer than a sewing needle, coated in something that smelled faintly of almonds and rot. Poison, the expensive kind. I held the needle where Helena could see it. Her eyes went wide. "Someone just tried to poison me," I said. My voice came out flat. This was the second assassination attempt in as many months. The Ironhold family was nothing if not persistent. "How are you not?" She trailed off, staring at the needle and then at me, waiting for symptoms that were not going to come. The Apollon-Kaiser was a military machine designed to fight in toxic atmospheres, radioactive wastelands, and the vacuum of space. Poison is not really in its threat category. I flicked the needle into the gutter. The same applies to you, by the way. If you maintain the Beauty 4 visualization at all times, your body takes on the mecha's properties, chemical resistance included. Understanding crossed her face, and then something else. Fear, not for herself. "If they know where you are," she said, "they will try again." She was right, and the next attempt would not necessarily aim at me. The second needle came out of nowhere, fast, silent, and aimed at a spot 3 inches to the left of where my neck had been a moment before. I had shifted my weight to face Helena. The dart sailed past me and struck her in the shoulder. Helena's eyes went blank. Her knees folded. I caught her before she hit the cobblestones, and the heat drained out of her body so fast, it was like holding a cup someone had just poured the water out of. The poison was designed for large monsters. monsters, something that could drop a golem in seconds. Inside a 14-year-old girl who had not yet built up her mecha's chemical resistance, it would work faster. I had the antidote in my hand before I finished the thought. Infinite rucksack, top shelf, the most expensive vial the Ashenvale apothecary sold. Clear liquid, bitter, and absolutely useless if the patient could not swallow. She could not swallow. She was unconscious, and her jaw was locked. I tilted her head back, poured the antidote into my own mouth, pressed my lips to hers, and forced the liquid past her teeth. Around me, the street had gone very still. Townspeople were watching. A woman in a shopkeeper's apron had her hand over her mouth. 2 hunters from the guild were standing in the doorway with expressions that suggested they were witnessing either a tragedy or a scandal and had not decided which. I did not care about any of them. I watched Helena's face, counted the seconds. Her eyelids flickered. Color came back, slowly, like paint bleeding into wet paper. She coughed once, twice, opened her eyes. "You are safe," I said. "The poison is neutralized." She blinked at me, then at the crowd, then at the distance between our faces, which was approximately 0. "Did you," her voice was hoarse, "did you just administered an antidote? You could not swallow on your own." The delivery method was the only option available. She sat up. I expected confusion, maybe anger. Instead, she looked at me with an expression I could not categorize, something between the way a person looks at a miracle and the way a person looks at someone who has just accidentally signed a contract they did not read. "We are getting married." Helena said it loud enough that the entire street heard. She was sitting on the cobblestones where I had caught her, still slightly pale from the poison, and she said it with the absolute unshakable certainty of someone announcing a law of physics. "Helena, in the Rosewind Kingdom," she said, "when a man saves a woman's life in that manner, they are betrothed. It is tradition. It is not optional." A murmur ran through the crowd. The shopkeeper lowered her hand. The 2 hunters in the doorway exchanged a glance that said they had decided on scandal. "I am 13, I said, which was technically true, and also the most useless objection I had ever raised, because the 50-year-old salaryman behind those words knew exactly how absurd they sounded. "So am I." She stood up, wobbled once, steadied herself, and looked at me with those Anna Tojo eyes, and the stubbornness in them could have dented plate armor. "I have decided. I will master my skill completely. I will become strong enough that no one can take anything from me again. And when both of us have mastered everything our skills can offer, we will marry." Behind me, someone in the crowd said something about young love. Someone else said something less charitable about boys who kissed girls in the street, and then made excuses. I stood there in the fading light with an empty antidote vial in my hand, and the peculiar realization that a former princess had just proposed to me in front of 40 strangers because of a cultural tradition I had not known existed until 90 seconds ago. In my previous life, I had once accidentally agreed to a subscription service because I did not read the terms and conditions. This felt similar, except the subscription was marriage, and the cancellation policy appeared to be non-existent. "Deal," I said, "when we have both mastered our skills." Not before. Helena smiled. It was not the small, fragile smile from the slime fields. It was the kind of smile that reorganized the room around it, the kind that told you the person wearing it had just locked something into place inside themselves, and nothing in the world was going to move it. "Deal," she said. The crowd applauded, because of course they did. 2 assassins sent by the same family, 2 failures. Fritz and Cordelia were going to need to find a new strategy, but that was their problem, not mine. As Helena and I walked back through the evening crowd, her shoulder brushing mine every few steps like a small quiet claim, I realized that for the first time since falling into this world, I was not walking alone. The 50-year-old in me said this was going to be messy. The 13-year-old agreed. Both of them kept walking. The weeks after the engagement settled into a rhythm so comfortable it almost felt earned. Mornings, hunt. Afternoons, sell. Evenings, dinner at the Golden Spoon, where Helena continued her systematic conquest of the dessert menu, and I continued to pretend I did not notice how she always ordered 2 of everything, so I would have one without asking. We cleared golem nests in the Ridgemark Mountains until the ranges started looking noticeably less mountainous. Ore prices climbed with the Dark Dragon mobilization, and every trip home meant another deposit that would have bought a small estate in my previous life. I hit level 100 on a Tuesday. Helena had declared Tuesdays are hard target days, so I remember. Level 100 unlocked Cold Flash, a freezing ray from the chest at a temperature so low the number stopped meaning anything. I tested it on a slime. The slime ceased to exist. Not killed, not frozen, annihilated. The ground cracked and the air turned white, and the magic stone was dust before I finished the exhale. Iron Turtle, same result. Golem, same result. Sealed, I said. Helena nodded. Every new skill on the Apollon Kaiser tree was more destructive than the last, and every one of them obliterated the materials I needed to sell. Cold Flash joined the growing list of abilities I owned, but could not use for anything practical. C rank promotion came a month later. Garrett stamped the forms with his usual lack of ceremony. We bought a house, stone walls, 3 bedrooms, a kitchen Helena claimed as personal territory, and a garden neither of us intended to garden. The nerve poison hit me in the neck on a Thursday. I pulled the dart out and sniffed it. Fast-acting paralytic, military grade. My body did not register it. The Apollon Kaiser operated in environments where the air itself was a weapon. Nerve toxin was a mosquito bite to a tank. The assassin was on a rooftop. He was reaching for a second dart when I appeared behind him and tapped the back of his skull with just enough force to switch him off like a lamp. His things told the story. Wallet, heavy. Contract papers, vague but clearly from Ironhold County. I took everything worth taking and left him his clothes. Helena was waiting at the front door when I came around the corner. Wallace was behind her, out of breath from running 2 blocks. Another one? Helena asked. Nerve poison this time. Expensive. I held up the wallet. Dinner is on the Ironhold family tonight. We went to the most expensive restaurant in Ashenvale. Ordered everything. Helena got 3 desserts. Wallace, who had been eating in-food for weeks and still flinched every time I offered him anything beyond bread, ordered a steak so large it arrived on its own table. I paid with the assassin's money and left a generous tip. 3 assassins sent, 3 failures, 3 different retirement plans. The Ironhold family was funding a small pension program for the assassination industry and did not even know it. Wallace had arrived on our doorstep 2 weeks earlier, and he had arrived badly. I came home from a hunt to find the innkeeper's wife standing in my garden with the expression of someone who did not want to be involved but could not bring herself to walk away. There was a man sitting against my front wall, middle-aged, dressed in what had once been fine clothes, now torn and dirt-stained. His face was swollen. His left arm hung at an angle that arms were not designed to hang at. Blood had dried in a line from his hairline to his jaw. He said he knows you, the innkeeper's wife said. I gave him water. That is all I can do. I knelt beside him. He looked up at me with one eye. The other was swollen shut. Young master, he said. His voice was a wreck. I am sorry to come like this. His name was Wallace. He had served the Ironhold household as a retainer for over 20 years. I did not remember him, which was expected since I had never actually been Adrian. But his face was the face of a man who remembered me, and his composure cracked the moment I knelt down. The most expensive healing potion in my inventory went to work. The bruises drained from purple to yellow to nothing. The arm straightened. The swelling receded until he could see me with both eyes, and the gratitude in them was the kind that made you look away. Tell me, I said. He told me. Fritz and Cordelia had used him as a scapegoat. The money spent on assassination attempts needed a cover story, so they framed him for embezzlement, cast him out with nothing, and told the staff he had been stealing for years. The Countess needed to justify the expenditures, he said, his voice steady now. I was convenient. He had walked for days to reach Ashenvale with no money, no food, and no plan beyond finding the one person from his old life who might not turn him away. You are hired, I said. House manager, room and board, plus salary. Start tomorrow. The relief on his face was so raw that Helena, who had been standing in the doorway, quietly left the room. The secret came out an hour later, after Helena had gone to bed and the house was quiet. Wallace sat across from me at the kitchen table with a cup of tea he had not touched. The formal composure was still there, but underneath it was something else. The hesitation of a man about to say something that could not be unsaid. There is a rumor, he said, about your parentage. I waited. The household staff spoke of it in whispers for years. The Countess, your mother. Before you were born, there was a period when the Count was away on military campaigns. For months. During that time, his great-uncle Robert visited the estate frequently. He paused. The tea cooled. The timing of your birth did not align with the Count's return. The staff noticed. The Countess knew they noticed. And Robert. Robert was kind to you, kinder than any great uncle had reason to be. So Cordelia hated me, I said, because I might be proof that she had an affair. The skill ceremony gave her the excuse she had been waiting for, a worthless skill, an easy disownment. The real reason had nothing to do with what your skill was. The kitchen was quiet. The lantern flickered once. It does not change anything, I said. Wallace looked at me. His expression was complicated. He had expected something. Anger, maybe. Grief. Some kind of wound opening. Young master. It explains the hatred, I said. It explains the assassination attempts. It is useful context, but it does not change what I am doing, or where I am going, or who I am building this life with. He stared at me for a long time. Then he bowed his head, and when he lifted it, the last trace of hesitation was gone. He had come to serve a wronged boy. He had found instead a man who had already moved past the wrong. I will serve you well, he said. I know, I said. Finish your tea. He did. It was cold by then, but he drank it anyway, and something in the way he set the empty cup down told me he had decided to stop mourning the family that had thrown both of us away. Good. I had stopped a long time ago. The hunting ban came on a cloudless morning. All C-rank hunters and below. No field activity until further notice. The dark dragon of Viande Mountain had awakened, and the Northern Coalition was mobilizing everything above D rank. The notice called it strategic defense. Every hunter in the guild translated it as wall of bodies. Helena and I spent a week doing nothing. We walked the market, tested skills in the backyard. For the first time since arriving in this world, the daily rhythm stopped, and the silence that replaced it was louder than any golem I had ever punched. Then Garrett sent for us. 3 hunters sat at the table. They were not sitting correctly. One was hunched forward with his arm in a sling. Another had bandages covering most of his face. The third was staring at the table with the 1,000-yard emptiness of someone who had recently watched a large number of people die. Garrett stood at the head of the table. He looked like a man who had received news that the world was ending and had decided to deal with it before lunch. The coalition is gone, he said. Over half of 100,000 soldiers are dead. The SSS rank champion is dead. Most of the S ranks with him. The dragon is still moving south. The hunter with the sling adjusted it with his good hand and winced. The association is planning a second conscription, Garrett continued. Every E rank and above. He paused. It will not work. He looked at me. I understood what he was asking before he asked it. No, I said. Adrian, I am C rank. I would be violating association rules. If I am caught in the restricted zone, the punishment is... The hunters at this table have agreed to take full credit. Garrett's voice was steady. You go. You do what you can. You come back. They claim the kill. Your name never appears. The hunter with the bandaged face spoke. His voice was raw. I watched the champion charge that thing with everything he had. 40 years of combat experience. SSS rank. The strongest fighter on the continent. He lasted 9 seconds. The room went quiet again. My father was in the coalition, I said. Garrett's face confirmed what I already knew. The Count of Ironhold's unit was in the vanguard. No survivors from that division have reported back. The man who had disowned me without looking back, who might not have even been my father. I felt nothing. Not grief, not satisfaction. Just the flat recognition that a piece of the board had been removed. Fritz? I asked. Unconfirmed. The rearguard broke before the dragon reached them. Some survived. Helena's hand found mine under the table. She did not squeeze. She just held it there, a quiet anchor against the current of information. The hunters sat across from me, battered, broken, offering their names as a shield so that a C rank nobody could do what an army could not. Garrett waited. If the dragon reaches the northern territories, it reaches Ashenvale. Yes, Helena's eyes met mine. There was no hesitation in them, just the calm readiness of someone who had already decided and was waiting for me to catch up. We leave tonight, I said. We flew north through the night. Helena carried 2 of the hunters. I carried the 3rd. The wasteland below us was black and featureless. The air smelled like a furnace that had been burning something wet. I saw the dragon before dawn, 300 meters of scaled darkness, walking south through wreckage that had been an army 3 days ago. It moved with the unhurried certainty of something that had never been given a reason to rush. Each step crushed a span of earth the size of a city block. I dropped the hunters on a ridge far enough back that the dragon's breath would not reach them. "Stay here," I said. The bandaged hunter nodded fast. Helena was already in the air beside me. She would be support. I would be the weapon. "Ready?" I asked. "Go," she said. I hit the dragon at full speed. Kaiser kick to the base of its neck. The impact sent a shockwave through the air that flattened Ash in a circle for half a kilometer. The dragon's head snapped sideways. Its body kept moving. 300 meters of momentum does not stop because something kicked it. It turned. Its eye found me. An eye the size of a building, yellow and ancient and completely unimpressed. Its mouth opened. The breath attack came as a wall of superheated air, dense enough to have weight. I dodged. The ground where I had been standing turned to glass. Kaiser punch to the skull, finger missiles to the joints, targeting the legs. The missiles punched craters in the scales, but the dragon kept walking. It had survived everything this world could throw at it. Cold flash. I fired from the chest. The freezing ray hit the dragon's flank, and I watched the temperature differential meet the heat pouring off its body. For 1 second, frost crawled across the scales. Then the dragon breathed, and the heat wave met the cold, and the cold lost. The frost evaporated. The scales were undamaged. My skill set was incomplete. The dragon was the first thing I had met that sat above my current ceiling, but raw power still worked. I flew at the skull, dodged one breath, dodged another, got inside the range where the mouth could not track me, and started hitting. Kaiser punch, Kaiser kick, punch, kick, punch. Each impact made the head ring like a bell. The dragon snapped at me and missed. It swung its tail and caught its own shoulder, staggering itself. I kicked it in the skull one last time. A flying kick, full speed. Every point of energy I had concentrated into a single strike aimed at the temple. The dragon stopped walking. Its legs buckled, first the front two, then the back. It went down in sections, like a building collapsing floor by floor. The ground shook, dust rose in a wall, and then it was still. The silence afterward was the loudest thing I had ever heard. The notification came before I landed. Level up. Multiple levels. New skill unlocks scrolled past faster than I could read. Rocket punch, unbreakable sword, Apollonius spear. 3 new weapons from 3 different points in the anime's progression. Helena landed beside me. Her eyes were wide. "You killed it," she said. "I kicked it in the head until it stopped. Adrian, you killed a dragon." I stood there in the wasteland, surrounded by the charred remains of an army that had failed, looking at a corpse the size of a city district. And for a moment, I let the pragmatist step aside and felt what the moment actually was. I had killed a dragon with my fists and my feet, and a skill named after a cartoon robot from a show nobody watched. The anime nerd from Saitama had just saved the continent, and nobody would ever know. Helena had leveled up too. New missile weapon, upgraded repair system. The skill trees were still climbing. The hunters arrived 20 minutes later. They stood in front of the corpse and said nothing for a long time. "We claim the kill," the bandaged hunter said eventually. As agreed, I said. "The materials and the magic stone go to the guild. The profit pays for the survivors' pensions. Your name stays out of every report. That works. No one will believe us." He looked at the corpse. "No one will believe 3 B rank hunters killed this. They just need to stop panicking." "Who are you?" he asked. "C rank hunter," I said. "From Ashenvale." We flew home before sunrise. Helena flew beside me, close enough that our shoulders almost touched. "New weapons," she said. "Both of us. The sword and the spear should preserve materials on kill," I said. "First time we have had cutting weapons that do not destroy everything they touch. That changes our income. It changes more than our income." She looked at me, understood, nodded. We landed outside Ashenvale as the sun came up, and we walked through the gate like we had been out for a morning stroll, and nobody looked twice at the 2 teenage hunters with ash on their boots and the smell of a dead god in their clothes. Back at the house, Wallace had breakfast waiting. He looked at us, looked at the ash, and chose not to ask. Smart man. Somewhere in Ironhold County, Fritz was declaring himself the new count. His father had not come home from the Dragon campaign. He would raise taxes to rebuild what the war had cost, and make every mistake a small, cruel boy with no supervision could make. But that was tomorrow's problem. Today, I sat at my kitchen table with Helena and Wallace, eating eggs that Wallace had somehow made taste like they belonged in a restaurant. And the morning was quiet, and for the first time in a long time, quiet felt like something I had earned. The man on my doorstep was in worse shape than Wallace had been. He had been beaten recently and thoroughly. His left eye was swollen shut. His jaw was purple from the chin to the ear. One arm was cradled against his chest at the careful angle of someone who knew exactly how much it would hurt if he moved it. His clothes were torn, his boots were caked with road mud, and he smelled like someone who had been walking for days without stopping to do anything except walk. Wallace recognized him before I did. He went pale and moved past me and knelt beside the man and said his name, Anton. The man's good eye found Wallace, and the composure he had been holding together for however many days of walking came apart. "He fired me," Anton said. His voice cracked on the word. "I told him the people could not pay. I told him they lost their fathers and brothers in the Dragon campaign. He did not want to hear it. I healed him, the same way I had healed Wallace months earlier. The bruises drained, the swelling receded, the arm straightened. When it was done, he sat on my kitchen bench with a cup of water that shook in his hands, and he told me what Fritz had done. 80%. That was the tax rate, not a wartime levy, not a temporary measure. 80% of everything, permanently, because Fritz needed money for a lifestyle his territory could no longer support, and because no one was left to tell him no. Anton had told him no. Anton had stood in the hall and said that families who had lost their breadwinners to the Dragon campaign needed relief, not extraction. Fritz's response was to beat him to the floor, fire him on the spot, and order him out of the county before sundown. I listened. Wallace listened. The kitchen was very quiet. "He is going to kill that territory," Anton said. "Everyone who can run is running. Everyone who cannot run is starving." I said nothing. "Young master." He used the same words Wallace had used, the title that belonged to a boy I had never been. "Please." Helena came in from the market and read the room in 2 seconds. She set the groceries on the counter, pulled out a chair, and sat. Wallace spoke first. There was a viscounty for sale, Silverfield, to the north. The previous lord had died in the Dragon Coalition. No heirs. The territory was a wreck, but it had land, water, and a border close enough to Ironhold that refugees could reach it on foot. The auction was in 3 days. "Buy it," Wallace said. "Give them somewhere to go." Anton leaned forward. "You have the money. You have the strength. You are the only person in the north who can do this." I looked at both of them, 2 middle-aged men who had served the Ironhold household for decades, who had been beaten and framed and discarded, sitting at my table asking me to become the thing I had specifically avoided becoming since the day I landed in this world, a lord. "No," I said. The word landed hard. Anton flinched. Wallace did not, but his jaw tightened. "My goal has not changed." I kept my voice level. "I am here to master my skill. There is a giant robot at the end of this progression, and I intend to reach it. Buying a territory, managing farmers, negotiating with counts, sorting out taxes and trade routes and land disputes. That is the opposite of what I came here to do." Helena watched me. She did not speak. "I am a hunter," I said, "not a noble." The kitchen was quiet. Anton stared at the table. Wallace's hands were folded in front of him, very still. Then Wallace spoke. "We will handle it." I looked at him. All of it. The governance, the administration, the logistics. Anton and I know how to run a territory. We did it for 20 years under the old count. We just need, he paused. "We need your name, your money, and your protection. We will do the rest." Anton lifted his head. "I swear on my life, we will not become what they became. 2 men, both broken by the same family, both sitting in my kitchen because they had nowhere else to go, both asking for something I did not want to give, and both promising to carry the weight of it themselves." I thought about the refugees, families with children, walking north through Fritz's territory with everything they owned on their backs, heading toward nothing because nothing was better than 80%. I thought about the robot. "If either of you becomes corrupt," I said, "I walk away. I take my name and my money and I leave, and you deal with whatever mess you have made. Those are my terms." Wallace bowed his head. Anton bowed his. Helena looked at me with an expression I had seen exactly once before, the night I had agreed to fight the dragon. Not surprise, not admiration, just the quiet recognition of someone watching a decision that could not be taken back. "Fine," I said. "We buy the territory. The Silverfield Viscounty sold for 200 million leagues. There were no other bidders. The territory was a wasteland in a region that had just lost most of its fighting men to a dragon, and the only person willing to pay for that particular privilege was a teenage hunter with more money than any noble in the room understood. I signed the papers. Wallace stood behind me with the posture of a man who had been waiting for this moment longer than he would admit. 0 taxes for the first year. That was the first order. Anton had suggested a small levy to establish loyalty. I told him loyalty was not purchased with a slightly less terrible rate. It was built by being the first lord in living memory who did not take everything and give nothing. The plans came fast. I had spent a previous life in corporate Japan, and rebuilding a ruined territory was not meaningfully different from restructuring a failing division. Identify the bottleneck, remove it, invest in the people who do the actual work, land reclamation for abandoned farms, tax exemptions for anyone willing to clear wasteland, a craftsman support program, priest-run schools for basic literacy and arithmetic, because a territory full of people who could read was a territory that could run itself, soup kitchens for the first winter, funded out of my hunting income, and a hunter association branch. That was the real engine. If I could sell materials locally instead of hauling them to Ashenvale, the margin improvement would fund everything else. Wallace organized it. Anton coordinated the refugees. I did what I was actually good at. I hunted. Count Ashford was a military man, white streaked hair, broad shoulders, the posture of someone who had spent more time in armor than in chairs. His study was maps and weapons, and the faint smell of leather polish. And when Helena and I walked in, he assessed us the way a general assesses reinforcements, quickly, thoroughly, with minimal sentiment. He offered 5 years for the Hunter Association branch. I asked for 10. He unrolled a map. 7 territories north of Silverfield, all abandoned, all wrecked by the Dragon campaign. No lords, no heirs, no one willing to touch them. He offered to add 1 year to the permit for every territory I agreed to oversee. All 7, I said. His eyebrow moved. Just the one. All 7, I repeated. 20 years. He studied me. 14 years old, sitting across from a count who had survived wars and political purges, and the collapse of the Northern Coalition. Whatever he saw satisfied him because he nodded. 20 years, he said. If the territory fails within 5, the permit reverts. It will not fail. He looked at Helena. She looked back without flinching. Your partner does not negotiate, he observed. She does not need to, I said. We shook on it. 20 years, 7 territories. A Hunter Association branch run by Garrett, who had been demoted from the Ashenvale office for his role in the Dragon cover story, and was now, by my request, the branch chief of a tiny outpost in the middle of nowhere. He arrived with 5 staff members and the expression of a man who had been reassigned to the wilderness and chosen to treat it as a promotion. 3 years passed. The first harvest almost failed. The soil was worse than the reports had said, and we lost a third of the planted acreage to drainage problems nobody had mapped. Wallace worked 18-hour days for a month and did not complain once. I bought better seed stock with hunting money, and we replanted. The second harvest fed the territory. The third harvest fed the territory and produced surplus for trade. Refugees came, first in handfuls, then in streams. Families from Ironhold with nothing except the clothes on their backs and the certainty that nothing could be worse than what they had left. We gave them land. We gave them tools. We gave them a tax rate so low that some of them stood in the registration office and asked if it was a trap. 30%. That was our permanent rate after the first tax-free year. 30% when the territory to the south was charging 80%. The Hunter Association branch turned into the economic engine I had designed it to be. Helena and I hunted. The materials went to the branch. Local workers processed and transported them for wages. The 20% association cut was the cost of doing business, and the remaining margin funded infrastructure, schools, and the craftsman workshops that were slowly turning a wasteland into something that functioned. Garrett ran the branch like he had been waiting his entire career for a job nobody wanted. I hit level 643. Helena reached 523. New skills unlocked with each milestone. Arm missiles, space boomerang. Helena gained a head-mounted energy weapon that she tested once on a boulder, and then spent 20 minutes staring at the crater with an expression I could only describe as delighted. The territory grew. Houses went up. roads connected settlements. A blacksmith district formed near the branch office because proximity to materials meant proximity to profit, and craftsmen follow profit the way water follows gravity. Wallace and Anton kept their promise. The governance was clean, the books were open, the people were fed, and I was still a hunter, still chasing the skill tree, still one unlock closer to the robot. It was not the life I had planned, but it was a life that worked. The reports from Ironhold came in pieces, and none of them were good. Wallace collected them. Traders who passed through, refugees who arrived with stories they told only after they had eaten and slept, guild runners who carried information the way they carried cargo, wrapped carefully, delivered without comment. Fritz had raised the tax to 90%. The territory under his rule had become something people did not speak about directly. Retainers who counseled restraint were removed. Families caught trying to leave were not seen again. The fields stood empty because the people who worked them had either fled or been broken by taxes that left nothing to plant with. I listened to the reports the way I read quarterly reviews in my previous life. Data, trends, projections. Fritz was not governing, he was consuming. The territory was a carcass, and he was picking it clean. And when the bones were bare, he would look for another carcass, because that was the only thing Fritz knew how to do. One report mentioned that a retainer had suggested asking me for help. The suggestion was not received well. The retainer was not seen again. I set the paper down. "He is going to come here," I said. Wallace nodded. He had already reached the same conclusion. Fritz would run out of things to consume, and when he did, he would look north, at the territory that was everything his was not, and he would convince himself that taking it was his right. "How many soldiers can he muster?" I asked. 200, perhaps fewer. Poorly equipped, no morale. "And ours?" 2,000. Trained, equipped, motivated. I did the math. It was not close. "When he comes," I said, "we do not wait for him to reach the settlements. We meet him at the border." Wallace bowed. Fritz came in the spring. 200 soldiers marching north. Helena and I flew to the border before they crossed it. We landed on the road, 2 figures standing in the path of an army, and we waited. They appeared over the ridge as a column of dust and dull metal, poorly equipped, exhausted, marching with the posture of men who had been told to fight and given no reason to believe they would survive. At the front of the column, riding a horse that was visibly struggling under the weight, was Fritz. He was not the 11-year-old boy I remembered from the skill ceremony. 3 years of absolute power and zero restraint had done their work. He was wider than the horse deserved, dressed in armor that had been built to impress rather than protect, and he carried a sword that had clearly never been drawn in practice. He saw me and stopped the column. He shouted something. From the distance, the words blurred together, but the tone was unmistakable. Outrage, entitlement, the voice of someone who had never been told no by anyone who was still standing afterward. Helena stood beside me. Her arms were crossed. "He brought 200, she said. "He did. We have 2,000. "We do." She looked at me sideways. "Were you worried?" "I was worried he would not come at all. Then we would have had to go get him." Wallace and Anton arrived with the army. 2,000 men crested the hill behind us and fanned into formation along the border road. They were equipped. They were organized. They were standing in neat ranks with the discipline of people who had something worth defending. And every single one of them had walked here from the territory that Fritz's refugees had built. Fritz's soldiers saw the numbers. The column stopped, weapons lowered, heads turned. The soldiers in the back were already calculating distances, not to the enemy, but to the nearest road heading somewhere else. One soldier in the front rank drew his bronze sword and struck at me. The blade snapped on contact. The sound rang across the open plain like a bell, and every soldier who had been considering his options stopped considering. They dropped their weapons, not all at once. The ones in the back went first, because the ones in the back always go first, then the middle, then the front. Metal hit dirt in a ragged cascade, and the army that Fritz had marched to war melted into a crowd of men walking south and east, and anywhere that was not here. Fritz screamed at them. His voice cracked. He ordered them to stop. He ordered them to fight. He threatened them with every punishment he had ever delivered, and every punishment made them walk faster, because the punishments were the reason they were leaving. Within 5 minutes, Fritz was alone on the road. His horse had left too. It had followed the soldiers, which said everything about the animal's judgment. He turned to Wallace and Anton, 2 men he had beaten, framed, and discarded. They stood 20 paces away with 3 years of patience in their posture. Fritz said something, an order, a demand. The words of a count addressing his retainers, delivered in the voice of a boy who had never understood that a title only works when people choose to follow it. Wallace and Anton stepped forward. What happened next was brief. I did not watch the details. I heard Fritz stop talking, and that was enough. When they stepped back, Fritz was on the ground, and the border road was empty except for us. We rode into Ironhold the same day. There was no resistance. There was no one left to resist. I ordered every slave freed. That was the first command I gave on Ironhold territory, and it took longer to say than it should have because my voice did something I had not authorized. Wallace and Anton stood in the great hall of the estate where they had served for 20 years. The room was bare. The walls had marks where paintings had hung. The furniture was mostly broken. The carpets were stained. Wallace said nothing. His face was very still. Anton's hands were shaking. "This was a good house once," Wallace said finally. He killed it. I let them have the moment. There was nothing I could say that would make the room less empty. Cordelia came last. She walked into the courtyard with the bearing of a woman who still believed she was in control of the room. Her dress was fine. Her posture was perfect. Her face was arranged into an expression of maternal concern, so practiced it might have fooled someone who had not been her target for 4 years. She looked at me, and her eyes filled with tears. It was a good performance. I would have given it a 7, maybe a 7.5. The quivering lip was a nice touch. She spoke. She called me her son. She said the things she had done were minor misunderstandings. She said any mother in her position would have done the same. She said she had always wanted what was best for me, and now that Fritz had been dealt with, there was no reason they could not start over as a family. I said nothing. The silence stretched. She adjusted, tried harder. The tears came faster. She mentioned the hardships she had endured. She mentioned her fear. She mentioned that she had no one left and nowhere to go. And was that not punishment enough? I said nothing. She turned to Helena. The pivot was smooth. A woman who had spent her life finding leverage, reaching for the next handhold even as the last one broke. She asked Helena to intercede. She called her daughter. She said that Helena understood, that women had to make difficult choices, that Helena would see the situation clearly, even if her son was too hurt to forgive. Helena looked at her for a long moment. "You sent assassins to kill him," Helena said. Her voice was level. 3 times. "You framed the man who served you for 20 years. You smiled when they took everything from a 13-year-old boy and put him on the road with nothing." Cordelia opened her mouth. "You are worth nothing to us," Helena said. "You were never a mother. You were a threat. And the only reason you are still standing here is because noble law says we cannot do what you deserve." The courtyard was silent. Cordelia looked at me one last time, searching for something, a crack, a wound, anything she could use. I gave her nothing, not anger, not hurt, not the satisfaction of knowing she had ever mattered enough to damage me. I was a 50-year-old man in her son's body, and she had never known that. And she would leave this courtyard without ever understanding why none of her tools worked on me. "Count Ashford will escort you to your family in Bramford," I said. My voice was flat. The flatness was deliberate. "Fritz will be sent to the royal capital. The Night Order will decide what to do with him." She stared at me. The tears had stopped. Under the performance, I caught a glimpse of something real, the bewilderment of a woman whose entire skill set had just been declared worthless. They took her away. I watched until the carriage turned the corner and disappeared. I felt no grief, no triumph, no vindication, just the clean, empty relief of a problem that was finally, completely finished. Wallace found me on the balcony as the sun went down. The territory spread out below in every direction. Fields that should have been green were brown and bare. Houses with dark windows. Roads with no traffic. 3 years of Fritz had left it looking like a place where people used to live. "We can fix this," Wallace said. "I know. It will take time. I know that too." He stood beside me. The sunset caught the gray in his hair and made it look silver. Anton joined us. Helena came out a minute later with 4 cups of something warm that turned out to be tea made from herbs she had found in the estate's kitchen. "The fields can be replanted by autumn," Anton said. "The refugees in Silverfield include families who farmed this land before Fritz drove them out. They will come back if we ask." "Then ask," Wallace pulled out a ledger he had already started, because of course he had. I looked out at the ruined territory that had once belonged to the family that had thrown me away. Helena leaned against the railing beside me. Her shoulder touched mine. "The robot," she said quietly. I looked at her. "You still want it?" "More than anything," she smiled. It was the small one, the one that meant she understood something I had not said. "Good," she said. "Then we build this territory until it runs itself, and then we go find it." Below us, a single lamp flickered on in one of the houses, then another, then a third. The people who had survived Fritz were still here, and they were watching, and the lights coming on one by one in the darkness felt like the beginning of something that I had not planned and could not quite name but was not willing to let go of. The Ironhold family had thrown away the wrong son. The proof was not in the army, or the territory, or the defeated brother bleeding on a road. The proof was in the lights. One at a time, in a territory that had been dark for 3 years, someone was turning them on. And for the first time, I did not mind that the robot would have to wait. The fields were the problem. Miles of them, stretching north into what used to be Ironhold County, and not enough hands to work a tenth of it. Wallace laid it out for me one morning over breakfast. The population numbers, the crop projections, the gap between what we had and what we needed. The math was brutal. Even with refugees arriving every week, we were short by thousands. I had run production shortfalls before. Different life, different body, but the logic was the same. When you cannot hire enough workers, you build a better tool. "We need machines," I told Wallace. "Farming machines, plows that run on magic instead of oxen, harvesters that do the work of 50 men. He stared at me like I had suggested teaching the crows to plant wheat. Helena, sitting across the table, just nodded. She had stopped being surprised by my ideas somewhere around the 2nd month of our partnership. "There is a craftsman," Wallace said carefully, "in Ashenvale. Brilliant by all accounts, but no lord has managed to retain him. We found Edgar's workshop by following the sound of the explosion. The building was still standing, but just barely. Smoke poured through a hole in the roof. A man stumbled out the front door coughing, his hair singed on one side, his apron scorched black. He was grinning. "That was closer," he said to no one in particular. "Definitely closer. Edgar was exactly what the shopkeeper in Ashenvale had warned me about. Brilliant, obsessive, completely incapable of managing money. He earned more in a season than most craftsmen saw in a decade, and every coin went straight back into experiments that exploded, melted, or occasionally vanished. His wife and 3 children lived in a 2-room shack behind the workshop because he had sold the furniture to buy rare catalysts. Helena saw the children first, 3 of them, sitting on a bare floor, the youngest without shoes. She turned on Edgar with a voice I usually only heard directed at enemies. She told him that his genius meant nothing if his family starved for it, that a man who could build miracles but could not feed his own children was not brilliant, he was selfish. Edgar's wife stepped between them. She defended him quietly, firmly, said she knew what she married, said the work mattered. I let the silence settle, then made my offer. A fixed salary, paid monthly whether his experiment succeeded or failed. A research budget separate from the salary. Housing for the family, schooling for the children, food and clothing provided. In exchange, he would build me farming tools powered by magic. Tractors, harvesters, anything that could turn empty fields into working farms with a fraction of the labor. Edgar looked at his wife. She looked at the children. He took the offer. Within 2 months, the first prototypes rolled out of Edgar's new workshop. They were ugly, blocky, loud, trailing sparks, but they worked. One magic tractor cleared in a day what 10 men with plows needed a week to finish. The harvester was worse looking and twice as effective. The territory changed fast after that. Helena and I hunted monsters daily, flying north to the high-density zones where the creatures bred faster than anyone could thin them. The materials and magic stones we brought back funded everything. Edgar's workshop, road construction, the new granaries, the seed stock. Wallace managed the treasury. Anton managed the people. I managed the killing, and the killing paid for the building. 3 years compressed into a rhythm. Plant, build, hunt, sell. Refugees kept arriving from the south, drawn by the zero tax first year and the 30% permanent rate after. Edgar's tools multiplied. Tractors became standard, then the combine harvesters, then the air-powered carts for transport. His workshop still exploded on a regular basis. I stopped flinching after the first year. The failure budget was part of the plan. Innovation costs what it costs. Any corporate research director knows that. By the end of the third year, the territory was unrecognizable. Full granaries, paved roads between the major settlements, a functioning market economy where there had been bare dirt and starving families. Wallace presented the fiscal summary with something close to pride in his voice. We were solvent, more than solvent. We were growing, but the reports from the South had started coming in. The first report was easy to dismiss. A hunting party in the far south had been wiped out by an unknown force. No survivors, no bodies recovered. It happened. The southern territories were wild, full of monsters nobody had cataloged. The second report was harder to ignore. A church in a remote settlement had been razed to the ground. The town around it, gone. Not abandoned, destroyed. The kingdom's investigators found nothing but rubble and strange metallic fragments embedded in the stone. Wallace brought me the third report himself, and this one made me set down my pen. A territory near the southern coast had been attacked by what witnesses described as a metal creature. Not a golem. Golems were slow, mindless, made of stone. This was fast, intelligent, and made of something that reflected light like polished steel. Machine beasts, I said quietly. Wallace looked at me. He did not know the term. I knew it. I knew it from a show nobody in this world had ever seen. The All-Galaxy Annihilation Corps, the villain faction from the Apollon Kaiser anime, used machine beasts as their foot soldiers. Monsters converted into mechanical weapons by implanting a core. If machine beasts existed here, then the faction existed here. And if the faction existed, then somewhere on this continent, their leader had been resurrected. Alminas, Empress of the Annihilation Corps. I stared at the dispatch, the metallic fragments, the destroyed church. The pattern was textbook. Establish a base, create soldiers, test them on isolated targets. She was rebuilding, slowly, carefully, somewhere nobody would think to look. Increase patrols on our southern border, I told Wallace, and start collecting every report of unusual monster activity from every territory that will share intelligence with us. He asked what I was looking for, something I hoped would never exist in this world. Alone in the study, I laid out every report on the desk and drew lines on the map. The destroyed settlements formed a rough arc curving south and east. Whatever was making these creatures was operating from the deep south, possibly the polar region, where no human settlement existed and no patrol ventured. The blue orbs were mentioned in 2 of the reports. Witnesses from a neighboring territory described a glowing sphere that had been seen drifting north before the attacks began. One account described it as the size of a fist, pulsing with light, moving with purpose, not drifting like a natural phenomenon, but flying like something sent. I sat with that for a long time. In the anime, Alminas created machine titans by implanting cores into willing hosts. The host needed to accept the power. The orb sought out people consumed by hatred, despair, greed, anyone whose emotions made them receptive. The transformation was permanent. The host's personality did not change. It amplified. I thought about who, in all the northern territories, carried enough hatred to attract something like that. Then I stopped thinking about it, because the answer was obvious, and I did not want to follow the thought to its end. Ashford arrived 3 weeks later with news that confirmed the worst version of the thought I had been avoiding. The Bramford Viscounty, Cordelia's birth family territory, where she had been sent after her exile, had been destroyed. The estate was rubble, the family was gone, and a giant metal figure, over 50 meters tall, had been seen striding across the landscape, seizing neighboring territories one by one. "It speaks," Ashford said. His voice was flat, the way military men speak when they are delivering information they find personally disturbing. "The survivors say it demands silk, wine, fine cuisine. It calls itself a lady of noble birth. Anyone who fails to provide what it wants disappears. Silk, wine, fine cuisine, noble birth." I did not need Ashford to tell me who it was. "She also claims," he continued, watching my face, "to be your mother." The room was quiet for a long time after that. A blue orb had found her, found the well of resentment and entitlement that had always defined her, and given her the power to become what she had always believed she deserved to be. The biggest person in the room, literally. I felt something shift in my chest, but it was not grief. It was not anger. It was the quiet recognition that the family I had already put behind me was not finished with me yet. "She is marching this direction," Ashford said. "My forces cannot stop her. The kingdom's investigators believe she destroyed the Bramford estate and everyone in it before expanding outward. 10 territories have fallen. An army will not help. I said. Conventional forces against a 50-meter machine titan would just be casualties. Ashford waited. Helena and I will scout her ourselves. We have fought something at this scale before. He did not argue. He had seen the aftermath of the Dark Dragon. He knew what Helena and I were capable of, even if he did not fully understand it. Helena was already waiting in the courtyard when I came down. She had heard enough from the dispatches to know where this was going. Your mother, she said, not a question. 50 meters of her. Helena's expression did not change. She had exhausted her patience for Cordelia in a single sentence the day we exiled her, and apparently, transformation into a metal giant did not earn a second allocation. Same personality, demanding luxury, crushing anyone who displeases her, blaming everyone else for her situation. I paused. So yes, exactly the same, just bigger. We had discussed what to do if a machine titan appeared in our territory. The plan had always been simple. We go, because nobody else can. Wallace and Anton would hold the territory. Edgar would keep building. The infrastructure did not need us for the day-to-day anymore. This could be worse than the Dark Dragon, I said. Helena looked north, toward the distant territory, where a 50-meter version of the woman who had tried to manipulate us both now sat on a makeshift throne demanding silk handkerchiefs. Then we had better not waste daylight. We launched from the courtyard and flew north. Below us, the territory we had built spread out in ordered fields and straight roads, golden under the midday sun. Ahead, somewhere past the horizon, something monstrous waited, and somewhere far to the south, the Empress who had given her that power was watching through whatever connection the blue orb maintained, learning, growing stronger with every act of destruction her new puppet committed. The anime had come to life. Not the heroic parts, not yet. The villain parts first. I flew faster. We found her in the town square. The town itself was gone. Not burning, not half standing. Gone. Streets emptied. Doors hanging open on every house. The only sound was wind pushing through gaps in the rubble. Whatever had lived here had either fled or stopped existing. And the silence told you which was more likely. Cordelia sat in the center of it all on a chair made from wreckage, beams, stone, what might have been a church roof, crushed and shaped into something resembling a throne. She was 50 meters tall, metal. The face was still hers, rendered in dark silver. Those sharp cheekbones and narrow eyes I remembered from a dining table 6 years ago. She was drinking from a pot the size of a carriage. Wine. Even as a monster, she wanted her wine served properly. Helena landed beside me. Neither of us spoke for a moment. We just looked. I had imagined this. None of the scenarios I had run during the flight included the silence. The absence of people was louder than anything Cordelia could have said. She noticed us eventually. Look down the way you look at a fly that has landed on your desk. Her voice came from somewhere inside the metal, amplified, distorted, still recognizably hers. She told us she had become the perfect queen, eternal life, absolute power. The world would kneel or it would be crushed. Humans were nutrients. Their only purpose was to bring her beautiful things in clean glasses. She was going to march on Thornwall tomorrow, then the capital, then everything. I listened. I had heard variations of this speech before. Fritz had given a version of it at 14, standing on the balcony of a county he was destroying. Their mother had whispered a version of it in the parlor the day she tried to convince me to let her stay. The words changed. The entitlement was genetic. I am going to kill you, I said. She laughed. The sound rattled windows 3 streets away. I turned to Helena. She already knew what I was going to ask. She stepped back, hands ready, and nodded once. Repair standing by, I launched. Kaiser punch. My fist connected with her shin, the biggest target I could reach from ground level. The impact should have cracked steel. I had punched through dragon scales, shattered enchanted armor, blown apart monsters twice my size. My knuckle hit her surface and stopped. No crack, no dent, not even a scratch. She did not move. Kaiser kick to the same spot. Nothing. I-beam, the concentrated heat that had burned through the dark dragon's hide, splashed against her knee like water on stone. Finger missiles exploded against her chest. The smoke cleared. She was untouched. What hit me? She said. A fly? Cold flash. The temperature around her right leg dropped to absolute 0. Ice formed, cracked, fell away. The metal underneath was pristine. Double arm tornado. I spun both arms and launched the vortex directly into her midsection. She swayed, barely, the way a building sways in a light breeze. Rocket punch. Both fists detached and screamed forward, trailing fire. They struck her face. The explosion was massive. Rubble launched 50 meters, dust clouds swallowing the square. When it cleared, she was smiling. The metal face had no lips, but I could see it in the angle of those eyes. She was smiling. "Let me teach you how to fight," she said, and she flicked me, one finger. The nail of her index finger caught me across the chest, and I went through 2 buildings, stone walls, wooden beams, a chimney. I felt all of them break against my back before I hit the ground on the other side. My ribs were wrong. My vision went white. Something in my left shoulder was not where it was supposed to be. "Adrian!" Helena's hands were on me before I could move. Warm light. The repair skill. I felt bones shift, muscle knit. The shoulder popped back with a sound that made my teeth clench. First time she had ever used it in real combat. First time I had ever needed it. I stood up, attacked again. She flicked me again. Helena repaired me again. I attacked. She swatted. Helena healed. I attacked. She swatted. Helena healed. The cycle repeated 5 times, 8 times, 12 times. Each impact sent me further. Each repair took longer. I was burning through Helena's energy faster than she could recover it, and every hit from Cordelia was harder than the last because she had been sitting down for the first ones. She had not even bothered to stand. On the 14th attempt, I used everything in sequence. Punch, kick, beam, missiles, cold flash, tornado, rocket punch. A full combination. Every skill I had unlocked across 640 levels. The Apollonius spear materialized in my hand, and I drove it into her face with everything I had. The spear tip touched her cheek, slid sideways, left no mark. She stood up. The shadow covered the entire square, 50 meters of dark silver blocking out the sun. She took 1 step toward us, and the ground cracked in a circle around her foot. I grabbed Helena and flew. She caught us 3 streets away. The blow was not a flick this time. It was a fist. The impact drove us both into the cobblestones so hard, the street cratered. Helena's repair flared, but I could feel the difference. The healing was slower now, thinner, like pouring water into a cracked cup. Nothing worked. 640 levels of Apollon Kaiser skills, every attack the anime had given me, and not a single mark on her surface. She was not a body, she was a machine. The sky was above me. That was the first thing that registered. Then the pain. Then Helena beside me, both hands pressed against my chest. The glow of repair flickering like a candle in a storm. Then Cordelia reached down and picked us both up. Her fingers closed around us like a cage. I felt my ribs compress. Helena gasped. The repair cut out. We dangled 50 meters in the air, crushed against cold metal, looking down at the destroyed town. Cordelia spoke to Helena, not to me. She told Helena she could live. Just let go of the boy. Walk away. Find another lord, another kingdom, another life. She would let the girl leave. She had no quarrel with her, only with Adrian. Helena's answer came without hesitation. No pause, no calculation, not even a glance at me to check if I wanted her to go. I have no intention of leaving him. Cordelia squeezed harder. Helena coughed, blood on her lip. You are wasting your life on a loser, Helena laughed. It was not a big laugh. She did not have enough air for that. It was a small, broken sound, but it was real. You do not understand, she said, because you only think of yourself. You have power now. What else do you have? Who stays with you because they choose to? Who eats with you, trains with you, argues with you about what to have for dinner? Cordelia's grip tightened. Helena kept talking. Her voice was getting thinner, but the words were steady. I have all of that. I have mornings and evenings and someone who knows how I take my tea. You have a metal body and a chair made of rubble. You have nothing. Cordelia threw us. We hit the ground and skipped across it like stones on water. When we stopped, Helena crawled to me. Her hands found my chest again. The glow sputtered. Barely anything left. I could not see straight. My body was not responding the way it should. Helena's face was above me, smeared with dust and blood, and she was still trying to heal me. I am staying, she said, quieter now, just for me. We will die together if that is what happens. I wanted to tell her to run. I wanted to order her to leave, but I had spent 6 years learning that Helena did not take orders from anyone, not kings, not monsters, not me. I tried to speak. What came out was closer to a whisper than a sentence. I am sorry. Sorry I had not leveled faster. Sorry I could not pilot the real thing. Sorry the skill I had spent decades loving had given me everything except the one form that could have saved us. The Apollon Kaiser, the actual robot, not the body techniques, was supposed to be the endgame, the final unlock, and I was going to die 50 meters short of it. My vision dimmed. Helena's hand was on my face. I lost consciousness thinking about a cockpit I would never sit in. Light, not sunlight, not magic. Something else entirely. White, absolute, pouring down from directly overhead like the sky had cracked open. It hit my closed eyelids and I saw it through them. The warmth that followed was not heat. It was repair on a scale Helena's skill could not touch. Bones fused, tissue rebuilt. The wrongness in my chest corrected itself in a single breath. I felt Helena's injuries close at the same time, heard her sharp inhale beside me. I opened my eyes. Cordelia was stumbling. The light had blinded her. She was swinging her arms at nothing, 50 meters of metal flailing in the empty air. We were no longer in her grip. We were standing on solid ground 30 meters away, fully healed, and the light was coming from something above us. I looked up. The dimensional rift hung in the sky like a wound in the fabric of the world. Through it, descending slowly, came a shape I had seen 10,000 times on a television screen in a one-bedroom apartment in Tokyo. It was enormous, taller than Cordelia, a towering figure of dark metal with the proportions of a samurai warrior, broad shoulders, armored chest plate, a helmet crest that swept back like a blade. The surface was not the dark silver of a machine titan. It was something else, darker, denser. The light reflected off it in colors I did not have names for. The Apollon Kaiser, the real one. I stopped breathing. I am not being dramatic. My lungs simply forgot to work. For 3 seconds, maybe 4, I stood in the ruins of a destroyed town with the wind pushing dust against my face, and I stared at the thing I had spent an entire lifetime wanting. Helena said my name. I did not hear her. The robot settled into position above us, blocking out the sun, casting a shadow that stretched across the entire town. Its eyes, 2 slits of pale gold set deep in the helmet, powered on with a hum I felt in my sternum. In a different life, I had watched this scene play out on a screen at 2 in the morning. Episode 1, the pilot episode. The hero stands in the wreckage. The robot descends. The activation phrase. I had said it along with the character every single time. I knew it the way you know your own name. Sacred legacy of the ancient Atlantis civilization, I said. My voice was steady. I was surprised by that. Descend to strike down the evil that threatens this world. Summon. Open the gate. Board. The cockpit hatch opened. A beam of light connected the robot's chest to the ground where we stood. Go, I whispered. Apollon Kaiser. The light pulled us upward. The cockpit was exactly how I remembered it. 2 seats, the pilot's chair in the center, surrounded by a console that wrapped in a half circle, throttle, targeting arrays, weapon selectors. A secondary seat behind and to the right, smaller, angled toward a repair and diagnostics panel. The viewing screen stretched across the entire front wall, showing the world outside in perfect clarity. Cordelia was down there, stumbling, blind, trying to find us. I sat in the pilot's chair. My hands found the controls without searching. Decades of watching another man's hands on these exact levers. I knew where everything was. The throttle grip had the same ridged pattern from episode 12. The weapon selector cycled through the same options I had memorized as a 30-year-old salaryman eating cup noodles alone at midnight. Helena settled into the secondary seat. She looked at me. I could not read her expression. It was something between concern and wonder. Are you ready? She asked. I tightened my grip on the controls. The robot responded. I felt it, not through sensors or instruments, but through my hands, my spine, the base of my skull. The machine moved because I moved. It breathed because I breathed. I have been ready, I said, for about 30 years. I pushed the throttle forward. The Apollon Kaiser took its first step. Cordelia had recovered her sight. She saw the robot, and I watched her expression change. The metal face shifting from confusion to recognition to something I had never seen on her before. Fear. You are the same as me, she said. A metal giant. She rallied fast. The narcissism was load-bearing. She told herself it was still just Adrian inside, the boy who could not scratch her, the son she had thrown away. It did not matter how big the toy was. She was the queen. She was wrong. Kaiser punch. The robot's fist connected with her face. The impact was different now. Not the dull thud of flesh on metal, but metal on metal. Titan against titan. She went backward. Not a stumble. Not a stagger. She flew. 50 meters of machine titan launched through the air, crashing through what remained of the town's east wall, skidding across open ground, carving a trench in the earth behind her. I stared at my own fist, at the robot's fist. Same attack, same name, different result. Every skill that had bounced off her minutes ago now landed with the full force of a weapon designed to fight exactly this kind of enemy. The anime's logic held. Body-level skills could not damage a machine titan. The robot could. Cordelia picked herself up. She was slower. Kaiser kick. The robot's leg swept low, catching her midsection. She folded around the impact and went down again. Eye beam. Twin beams of concentrated energy fired from the helmet's eye slits. They hit her face. She screamed. One of her optical sensors shattered, the blue-white glow flickering out, half blind. Helena called the opening from the secondary seat. Right side. She cannot see it coming. Cold flash. The temperature around Cordelia's right arm plunged. Ice formed. Real ice this time. Thick, structural, locking the joints. She tried to swing. The arm did not respond. Finger missiles. 10 projectiles launched from the robot's right hand, all targeting the frozen arm. The explosions cracked the ice, and then cracked what was underneath. The arm separated at the shoulder. It fell. 50 meters of metal limb hitting the ground like a felled tree. Cordelia staggered, one-armed, half-blind. The queen of the world, missing pieces. She begged, "I will give her this." It was a convincing performance. The metal voice softened. She called me by name. She said she had been wrong. She said the power had corrupted her, that the blue orb had changed who she was. She would go to the church. She would live quietly, humbly. She was sorry. She was my mother. Could I not find it in myself to forgive her? For 1 second, I hesitated. Not because I believed her. I did not. I had watched this woman smile while my belongings were confiscated. I had watched her push for my exile with the practiced concern of someone who had been waiting for the opportunity. The blue orb had not changed who she was. It had given her the power to stop pretending. I hesitated because you hesitate, because the word mother means something even when the person behind it does not, because some reflex buried deeper than logic and deeper than 2 lifetimes made my hand pause on the throttle for 1 single second. She lunged. Her remaining arm shot forward, and her legs wrapped around the robot's waist. Vice-type machine titan. Legs 3 times stronger than arms. The blue orb had told her that. She squeezed with everything she had, trying to crush the cockpit, trying to break us in half. I heard the metal groan. Helena grabbed her armrests. The viewing screen flickered. Then the sound changed. Not the robot cracking. Something else. Something outside. Cordelia screamed. Her legs, the strongest part of her, the weapon she had been saving, shattered against the hull. Super galaxy, super alloy. The material the anime had invented to be unbreakable. In this world, it was unbreakable too. Her legs broke like glass against it. Fragments of dark silver scattering across the ground. She hung from the robot's waist by one arm, legless, the scream still going. I did not give her another second. Double arm tornado. The robot's arms spun, generating a vortex that ripped her grip free and launched her straight up. She tumbled skyward, a broken metal figure spinning against the blue. Rocket punch. Both fists detached and screamed upward, trailing fire, homing on the tumbling shape. They connected at the apex. The explosion lit the sky. For a moment, there were 2 suns. The debris fell slowly, burning fragments of dark silver drifting down like the worst kind of snow. Some landed in the fields beyond the town. Some landed in the rubble. The largest piece, I did not look at it closely enough to know what it had been, hit the ground with a sound that carried across the silence. I sat in the pilot's chair. My hands were still on the controls. The viewing screen showed the aftermath. Smoke, a crater where she had launched from. Scattered metal cooling in the afternoon sun. Nothing moved. I waited for something to arrive. Grief, maybe? relief, satisfaction, anything that would tell me what I was supposed to feel after killing the woman who had given birth to the body I wore. Nothing came. I told myself I felt nothing. That was not entirely true. There was something, a hollowness, like a room that has been emptied of furniture, not sadness, not guilt. The absence of something that should have been there and was not. I had killed my mother. The sentence sat in my mind like a fact on a spreadsheet. Row complete, cell filled, move to the next line. Helena unbuckled from the secondary seat. She moved to my chair and stood beside me. She did not say anything about what had happened. She did not tell me it was the right thing to do, or that it had to be done, or that Cordelia had left no choice. She did not fill the silence with words that would have made it worse. She took my hand. I did not pull away. We sat there for a while. The burning fragments settled. The smoke thinned. Somewhere beyond the ruins, the wind picked up and carried the smell of hot metal south, away from us, away from the territory we had built, away from everything we had almost lost. I should have felt like a hero. I had summoned the robot. I had won. But the chair next to me was warm where Helena had been sitting, and outside the viewing screen, a mother was burning. And I could not make those two facts exist in the same sentence without something going quiet inside me. Helena squeezed my hand once. I squeezed back. That was enough. They made me a margrave. The ceremony took less than 20 minutes. Ashford stood beside me in his brass-buttoned coat, doing most of the talking. Which territories fell under the title, which obligations came with it, which nobles had been consulted, and which had been overruled. I signed where I was told to sign. A clerk pressed a seal into red wax. Someone handed me a badge that weighed more than it should have. Margrave of Ironhold. Every piece of land north of Ashford's county, minus the city of Thornwall, now answered to a 19-year-old who had been disowned 6 years ago for a joke skill. The kingdom was not being generous. They were being practical. I had killed the thing that destroyed the North. The land was mine by default, because nobody else wanted the rebuilding costs. Ashford caught my expression and smirked. You expected a parade. I expected a longer meeting, I said. In my old job, a title change took 3 rounds of approvals and a lunch nobody wanted to attend. He did not ask what I meant by old job. He never did. That was the best thing about Ashford. Helena stood at the back of the room in a dark green jacket that made her look like she belonged in a capital. When the clerk handed me the badge, she gave me a small nod. Not congratulations, acknowledgement. We both knew this was not a reward. It was a leash with good branding. The Greenwall King brought us south within the week. I had expected a briefing, a strategy session, perhaps a map with arrows on it. Instead, the king looked at me across a field table and said something about how the southern border needed clearing, and his own forces were stretched. He did not say please. He said it the way someone says, pass the salt. We went. Helena and I. No retainers, no escort. Wallace and Anton were rebuilding Ironhold. Edgar's workshop had taken on 6 new apprentices and was producing farming equipment faster than the territory could plant. There was no one to spare, and frankly, no one we needed. Helena and I had fought a 50-meter machine titan 3 months ago. Jungle monsters were a different scale of problem. The southern campaign was a week of efficient violence. We landed at the front, identified what was killing the Greenwall companies, and removed it. The golden apes that had stalled their advance for a season fell in a single afternoon. Helena flanked while I drew attention, and the pattern repeated across 12 engagements. We cleared more ground in 7 days than the Rosewind Kingdom's entire army had managed in a month. Helena noticed the way the officers looked at us. They will start being afraid of us soon, she said one evening as we cleaned weapons by a creek. The jungle canopy blocked most of the sunset, but orange light found gaps and scattered across the water. They already are, I said, but scared allies still trade with you. Scared enemies do not. She was quiet for a moment. Then, my father was never afraid of anything. That was his problem. I did not push. Helena spoke about her father the way she spoke about a wound that had closed but never stopped aching. Briefly, precisely, and only when something made it unavoidable. He let everyone else make his decisions, she said. The queen, the ministers, the generals who lost every campaign they commanded. He sat on his throne and let them steer. By the time I was old enough to understand what a king was supposed to be, I had already learned that mine mine was not one. Her voice was steady, not bitter, just accurate. They exiled you because he was too weak to stop them, I said. She nodded. And he was too weak to visit me after. Too weak to write. Too weak to be angry on my behalf. The creek kept running. I stopped being angry about it a long time ago. I replaced it with something worse. What? Pity. The invitation arrived 2 weeks after we returned from the south. A young messenger from the Rosewind Kingdom, dressed too formally for someone delivering a simple letter, standing in our hall with the careful posture of a man who had been told exactly what to say and how to say it. King Aldrich of Rosewind was hosting a victory celebration. The southern campaign was over. All allies of the realm were invited. The letter named Helena specifically. Helena, who was officially dead in Rosewind. Helena, whose exile had been permanent and whose name had been struck from the royal records by the queen and the ministers her father had never once overruled. I read the letter twice. He knows you are alive, I said. He always knew. She was standing by the window, arms folded, watching the courtyard below where the messenger's horse was being watered. The queen told everyone I died on the road. My father never corrected her, but he knew. And now he is inviting you to a celebration. Yes, I set the letter down. Something about it did not sit right. Not the words. The words were fine, formal, appropriate. It was the timing. A weak king who had spent 2 decades being steered by his court does not suddenly issue personal invitations to the daughter he let be thrown away. Something had changed. I want to go, Helena said. She did not say it the way someone asks permission. She said it the way someone announces a decision they have already made and are informing you of as a courtesy. Then we go, I said. But if anything feels wrong when we arrive, we leave. No negotiations, no diplomacy. We leave. Agreed. I sent word to the Greenwall King that we would be attending the Rosewind celebration as diplomatic envoys. Then I packed light, which for us meant nothing except what was already inside the infinite backpack. We flew out the next morning. The hall was beautiful. I will give them that. 3 stories of vaulted stone ceiling, chandeliers the size of carriage wheels, polished floors that reflected the light back upward so the room seemed to glow from underneath. Long banquet tables stretched the length of the space, and every seat was filled. Nobles, ministers, generals, the queen and her faction in the center like a court within a court. The smell of roasted meat and fresh bread filled the air like a promise. They seated us at the edge, the farthest table from the high platform where the king sat. Helena was a dead princess, and I was a foreign margrave, and the seating chart told us exactly how much that mattered. Helena's face showed nothing. She had expected this. I watched the room instead. The queen, seated at the king's right hand, broad-shouldered and imperial, commanding the conversation at the high table without raising her voice. The generals clustered near the center, medals catching lamplight. The ministers who had voted to exile a child arranged around the queen like planets around a sun. King Aldrich sat at the head of it all, small, thin, a man who wore his crown the way some men wear borrowed clothes, carefully, aware that it did not belong to him. He ate little. He spoke to no one. His eyes moved across the room with the slow sweep of someone memorizing the contents. Something about those eyes bothered me. Weak men looked inward. King Aldrich was not doing that. He was looking at every person in the room with the steady patience of someone checking items off a list. Helena, I see it. Her voice was low. She had not touched her plate. The king stood. The hall quieted in layers. The nearest tables first, then the middle, then the far edges where we sat. It took perhaps 10 seconds for 200 voices to become silence. He spoke. I will not repeat most of what he said. It was a speech meant for the people in that room, and none of them survived to hear it quoted back. But the shape of it was this. He called the queen by name and listed every decision she had made on his behalf without his consent. He called the prime minister a parasite. He called the generals cowards who lost the southern campaign through incompetence and blamed the soldiers. He named the nobles who had profited from the kingdom's decline and told them exactly how much gold they had taken and from whom. His voice did not shake. That was what stopped me cold. This was not a man breaking down. This was a man who had been rehearsing for a very long time. The queen tried to silence him. 2 ministers stood. A general reached for his ceremonial sword. King Aldrich's skin turned blue. Not gradually, not like a flush or a fever. One moment he was a thin man in a crown, and the next he was something else. Metal consumed him from the inside. I could see it rippling under his skin, replacing flesh with dark silver plate. He grew. The chair shattered. The table split. The platform cracked as his feet expanded beyond human proportion. The crown fell and was crushed under a metal foot that was still growing. Machine Titan, the blue orb. Almina's had found him, the weakest king on the continent, the man with the most reasons to hate everyone in his own court. And she had handed him the same poison that had turned Cordelia into a 50-meter monster. I was already moving. Helena was already beside me. He opened his mouth. Blue light filled it like a furnace door swinging wide. The hall erupted. Blue light consumed everything. Not fire, something beyond fire, something that did not burn so much as erase. The wave rolled outward from King Aldrich's open mouth and swallowed the room in a single pulse. I grabbed Helena and threw every defensive skill I had between us and the light. The barrier held. The floor beneath us cracked. The air turned white. When my vision cleared, the seats were empty. The tables were ash. The chandeliers lay in molten heaps on the floor. The vaulted ceiling was gone. Open sky above. Stars visible through the smoke. Every wall had been blown outward. The grand hall of the Rosewind Palace held nothing but rubble and silence, and the sharp smell of ozone gone. I stood in the wreckage with Helena's hand gripping my arm hard enough to leave marks. The barrier flickered around us, energy nearly spent. Beyond the ruins, King Aldrich stood in his machine titan form, 40 meters of dark silver metal wreathed in blue flame, eyes burning like furnace vents, staring down at the destruction he had made. He said something. His voice was metal grinding on metal, enormous, filling the empty space where the hall had been. He said something about freedom, about puppets and strings, about being tired. He turned toward the rest of the capital. No, I said, not a command, not a battle cry, just the word. Because whatever King Aldrich had been, whatever had been done to him, whatever he was owed by the people who controlled his life, the capital was full of people who had nothing to do with any of it. Bakers, children, merchants who had never set foot in a throne room. I activated the skill. The Apollon Kaiser materialized around me, different from the first time. In the field outside Bramford, the robot had come from a rift, summoned by desperation, arriving like an answer to a question I had not known how to ask. This time, I felt the cockpit form around me deliberately, the seat adjusting, the controls sliding under my hands. Not perfect. The summoning still cost more than it should, and I could already feel the time limit ticking somewhere in the back of my awareness. But this time, I knew what I was doing. Helena's voice came through the communication channel. I have it. I turned the viewing screen left. Beauty 4 stood beside Apollon Kaiser, shorter, sleeker, built for speed where Kaiser was built for force. White and rose-colored armor, dual boomerang blades already deployed at the hips. Helena's robot, her skill made real for the first time as a separate machine. You manifested it, I said. I have been ready for weeks. No surprise in her voice, just confirmation. She had been waiting for the moment she needed it. This was it. King Aldrich's machine titan turned toward us. Blue flame curled around his shoulders like a mantle. He was larger than Cordelia had been, not quite as dense, but taller, broader, the blue orb's power amplified by whatever was left of a king's pride. He moved first. The blue fire came again, a directed blast aimed at the two robots standing between him and the capital. I raised the barrier mantle. The flames split around us, pouring left and right into empty streets. The heat was enormous. The flagstones under our feet glowed orange, but he could not move while he was breathing fire. I knew that from the anime. Machine Titans traded mobility for their strongest attack. King Aldrich was rooted in place, pouring everything forward. Helena, flank him. I will hold the front. She was already moving. Beauty 4 was fast, faster than Kaiser by a factor I had not expected. She circled wide, staying outside the flame cone, the boomerang blade spinning in her hands. I taunted him, not words. A cold flash to his chest. Ice formed across the Titan's torso, thin and temporary, but enough to make him flinch. The fire stuttered. He redirected at me, and the flame cone narrowed, hotter but tighter, more focused, less coverage. Helena hit him from behind, both boomerang blades thrown at full force, carving into the back of his knees. The metal screamed. He staggered. The fire stopped as he caught himself on one hand. I closed the distance. Rocket punch. One fist only, aimed at his right shoulder. It connected. The arm crumpled inward. He swung the left arm, and I caught it with Kaiser's gauntlet. Metal grinding against metal. Servos whining under the strain. Adrian! Helena's voice. Quiet, not desperate, certain. Let me. I looked through the viewing screen. King Aldrich's machine titan was on one knee, one arm crushed, the other locked in Kaiser's grip. Blue flame flickered weakly around his head. He was not fighting at full power. He had not been fighting at full power since the beginning. The openings I had exploited were not weaknesses. They were invitations. He wanted to be stopped. Go, I said. Beauty 4's blade fell, one clean stroke, through the titan's neck, where the metal was thinnest, where a man's throat would be if the man were still inside. The sound was quieter than I expected. Not a crash, not an explosion. A severing, a release. The machine titan stopped moving. Blue light bled from the cut, dimming, fading. The massive body sagged in Kaiser's grip, and I released it. It fell slowly, a mountain collapsing in stages, first the shoulders, then the torso, then the legs buckling until 40 meters of dark silver lay still on the cracked flagstones of the palace plaza. The blue flame went out. I ejected. Helena ejected. The robots held their positions, standing over the fallen titan like sentinels, while we dropped to the ground and ran to where the head lay. His face was visible, not the machine titan's face, King Aldrich's. The transformation was peeling away, metal flaking from skin like paint from old wood, revealing the thin, tired features of a man who had been wearing a crown he never wanted. His eyes were open. They found Helena first. They always would have found her first. His lips moved. The voice was human again, barely, a whisper that carried in the silence because there was nothing else left to compete with it. He said he was sorry, that he had been too weak to protect her when it mattered, that the queen and the ministers had demanded her exile, and he had signed the order because he had never in his life refused a demand from anyone stronger than him. He said the blue orb had not given him courage. It had given him the ability to stop caring about consequences. He said he was glad she had become strong. His eyes moved to me. He said something about the letter, that a sealed envelope would be found in his private study, that it had been written before the celebration, before the blue orb, before any of this. His hand reached upward. Helena took it. He said one more thing. I will keep the exact words between him and his daughter, because some things are not meant for an audience. But the shape of it was this. He had known she would come. He had known she was the only person strong enough to stop him and compassionate enough to understand why he had done it. The celebration was his revenge. The invitation was his request. He had wanted her to free him. Helena held his hand until it went still. The metal finished flaking away, and what remained was just a man, small, thin, wearing borrowed clothes. The crown had been crushed hours ago under a metal foot. It did not matter. He had stopped being a king long before tonight. She did not cry. Not there. Not in the plaza with the wreckage still cooling around us. She knelt beside him and closed his eyes with 2 fingers, and the gesture was so steady and so gentle that it broke something in me that the entire battle had not touched. I stood behind her. I did not speak. Some things cannot be delegated, and some silences are not empty. They are full of everything a person cannot say and does not need to. The letter was where he said it would be, a single sealed envelope in the top drawer of his desk, addressed to no one. Helena opened it. I read it over her shoulder. King Aldrich's handwriting was small and careful, the penmanship of a man who had spent his life writing what other people told him to write, and had finally, once, written something for himself. The letter appointed me as the next king of Rosewind. Not Helena, me, because Helena was his daughter, and the law of succession in Rosewind required a male heir, or a male consort of a princess. The letter named her as queen consort and specified that all authority was shared equally. He had thought of everything: the legal language, the succession precedents, the witness seal of a loyalist general named Boatwan, who appeared at the palace gates an hour after the battle with 300 soldiers, and the look of a man who had been told to stay away and had finally understood why. Boatwan explained what he could. The king had ordered him to keep everyone clear of the celebration hall, not to protect the guests, to protect everyone else. The king had known what the blue orb would make him do, and he had made sure the only people in the blast were the ones who had spent 20 years pulling his strings. It was not justice. It was not mercy. It was the only decision King Aldrich had ever made entirely on his own, and it had killed him. We married 3 days later. Not the wedding I had imagined in either lifetime. In my old life, I had not imagined one at all. The salaryman who ate dinner alone and watched mecha anime until 2 in the morning, had given up on that particular fantasy sometime around 40. In this life, I had told Helena we would wait until we mastered our skills. That condition had been met. The Apollon Kaiser had been summoned twice. Beauty 4 had fought its first real battle. Our skills were not complete. There was more to unlock, more to learn, but mastery was no longer a distant goal. It was a road we were walking. The chapel was small, stone walls, a single window of colored glass that threw a pattern of gold and green across the floor. Boatwan stood as witness for the Rosewind side. Wallace and Anton had traveled from Ironhold when word reached them. Edgar sent his congratulations through a letter that was mostly a technical sketch of a wedding gift he was building, some kind of heated floor system for the palace. The note at the bottom said, "Congratulations also." Helena wore a formal dress for the first time since I had known her. White and pale gold. Simple. No crown yet. Her hair was pulled back from her face, and the morning light from the window caught the edges of it and made them glow. She looked like a queen. She had looked like a queen in hunting leathers and battle armor too. But this was different. This was the version of her that the Rosewind court had tried to erase. The princess they exiled. The daughter they declared dead, standing in her father's chapel, wearing her mother's kingdom's colors. The ceremony was brief. Vows spoken, rings exchanged, a kiss that lasted longer than it should have in front of Boatwan and the retainers. Wallace cleared his throat. Anton pretended to look at the ceiling. I held her hands and felt the weight of what it had cost to get here. 6 years of exile, a skill everyone laughed at, a family that threw me away, a mother who became a monster, a father-in-law who became a monster so his daughter could free him, 2 kingdoms built from wreckage, a giant robot I had dreamed about for 30 years. Helena squeezed my hands. I squeezed back. The same language we had spoken in the cockpit after Cordelia. The same language we would speak in every silence that followed. Enough. King Adrian of Rosewind, Boatwan announced to the chapel. Helena leaned close. "You wanted to pilot a robot," she whispered. "You got 2 kingdoms. The robot was better," I whispered back. She almost smiled. Almost. The shadow was still there, her father's face in the plaza, the hand going still, the eyes that had found her first and last. It would be there for a long time, maybe always, but she was standing, and she was here, and she was mine, and I was hers. And outside the chapel window, the sun was rising over a kingdom that belonged to 2 exiles who had been told their skills were worthless. We walked out together. The morning air was cool. The capital was quiet. At the South Pole, Alminas was hiding, and her blue orbs were still out there, and the world was full of broken people who might accept them. But that was tomorrow. Today, a Margrave had become a king, and a dead princess had become a queen, and the chapel bells rang once across the city. Not a celebration, not a morning toll, but something in between. The sound of a door closing on everything that came before and opening onto everything that came next. Helena took my hand as we stepped into the light. I did not let go. The first month of being king taught me something no management seminar ever covered. When you run a company, the worst that happens is a bad quarter. When you run a kingdom, the worst that happens is famine, invasion, or a giant metal elephant. We got the elephant on week 2. Count Starker in the eastern provinces had swallowed one of those blue orbs and turned into a machine beast the size of a cathedral. Helena and I flew out, summoned the robots, and ended it before lunch. His forces surrendered by dinner. I spent the evening reading tax ledgers while Helena drafted letters to every surviving Eastern noble, explaining the new order. By the end of the 3rd week, we had integrated the entire Eastern region under direct Rosewind administration. That became the pattern. Wake up, review reports, handle whatever crisis the continent had produced overnight. Eat, delegate, hunt monsters for revenue, eat again, plan tomorrow. Helena managed the politics with a patience I had never possessed. She sat through meetings with regional lords who circled the same point for hours, and when they finished, she summarized their positions in 3 sentences and proposed solutions in 2. I attended the same meetings and thought about Apollon Kaiser's missile reload speed. Wallace ran the treasury like a man who had spent years watching someone else do it badly and had memorized every mistake. Anton built roads, organize construction crews, and somehow convince 300 refugees to settle in the eastern flatlands by promising them the one thing no other lord offered: zero taxes for the first year. The territory filled in like water-finding cracks. The wedding had been 3 days after the battle. The honeymoon lasted exactly one evening before the Eastern crisis pulled us out. Helena never complained. She kissed me at the door, put on her jacket, and said we could honeymoon when the continent stopped producing metal monsters. I believed her the way I believed quarterly earnings projections, optimistically, with reservations. We made it work. Then I hit a level threshold and the skill menu updated with 3 words that made my hands shake. Atlanta's Base Transfer. I knew that name. From the anime. Episode 47. Apollon Kaiser had a support base hidden beneath the ocean, built by a civilization that predated humanity by 10,000 years. Repair bays, weapons research, a navigation system that could track threats across the planet. I had memorized the floor plans from the fan wiki when I was 37 and had nothing better to do on a Sunday afternoon. That information had been useless for 13 years. It stopped being useless. Helena and I transferred in together. The facility was real, massive, metallic corridors stretching in every direction under soft blue-white light. The air was cool and clean in a way that no castle ventilation could match. We found a kitchen that prepared meals on voice command, hot spring baths carved into the bedrock below the ocean floor, repair bays large enough to hold Apollon Kaiser with room to spare. A navigation console in the central command room projected the entire continent in holographic relief, every mountain and river glowing faintly above the table. I stood in the middle of that room and felt something I had not felt since the first time Apollon Kaiser appeared from the sky. The anime was not just a skill. It had left infrastructure in this world. Bases, robots, technology, all buried and waiting for someone who understood what they were looking at. Every floor plan I had traced on graph paper during lunch breaks, every stat I had argued about on dead forums, all of it was real. The most useless knowledge in my old world was the most valuable knowledge in this one. Edgar cried when we brought him down. Real tears, no embarrassment. He touched the walls, ran his fingertips along the circuitry, and whispered that he could spend 10 lifetimes here and never understand all of it. I gave him a laboratory on the second sublevel. He did not sleep for 3 days. His explosions were quieter down here. The walls absorbed the sound. Helena and I moved in that night. The bed was better than the palace. The water was hot without firewood. The food appeared on the counter without a cook. "This is absurd," she said, drying her hair after the hot spring. "This is Tuesday," I said. The shark came 3 weeks later. Trade ships heading to our port at Rankar started vanishing. 1, then 2, then a third in 8 days. Survivors who washed ashore told the same story. Something enormous and metal, shaped like a shark, rising from below and splitting the hull in a single pass. It never surfaced fully. It never chased survivors. It killed the ship and left. Helena and I loaded a decoy vessel with the skeleton crew and enough empty hold space to conceal Apollon Kaiser. We sailed into the hunting zone at dawn and waited. By mid-afternoon, the hull shuddered. It hit us from starboard, rising at an angle that sheared through the lower deck in one bite. Jaws wider than the ship's beam, teeth like industrial shears. The deck split and the ocean poured in. I launched from the collapsing hold before the ship folded, Apollon Kaiser deploying around me in midair as the wreckage rained into the water below. Helena was already airborne in Beauty 4, circling high. The shark dove. I went after it and discovered immediately that giant robots were not designed for aquatic combat. The water dragged at every joint. The shark was faster, cutting back beneath me twice before I could line up a strike. Helena solved it. Every time the thing surfaced for another pass, she hammered it with explosive arrows from above, forcing it higher and slower. On the third pass, I caught it. Kaiser's spear through the open mouth, driven straight down into whatever served as a core. The metal body shuddered, locked, and began to sink. I held on until the glow in its eyes went dark, then pulled free and floated in the wreckage alongside Helena. We bobbed in the debris for an hour waiting for the rescue boats. The skeleton crew had evacuated to lifeboats before the hit. No casualties. 1 destroyed decoy ship, 1 destroyed machine beast, and 2 monarchs floating in the ocean in giant robots, like the world's most expensive bath toys. "You smell like fish," Helena said from the Beauty 4 cockpit. "You're welcome," I said. The shark wreck gave us something better than a victory. Edgar, digging through the Atlantis-based subsystems, found salt extraction arrays built into the lower levels. Desalination on an industrial scale. The facility could produce more salt in a single day than most territories scraped from their mines in a month. Wallace ran the numbers twice, then a third time because he did not believe them. The margins made monster hunting look like charity work. I sent the first shipment to the Greenwall Kingdom personally. King Ashford tasted the salt, reviewed the price, and signed a 10-year exclusive trade agreement before I finished my tea. Within 2 months, Rosewind salt was moving through every major market on the continent. Revenue covered reconstruction, funded Edgar's research, and left surplus for infrastructure, roads, housing, a proper military garrison. Helena negotiated a mutual defense pact with Greenwall against mechanical threats, and Ashford agreed without hesitation. When your trade partner controls your salt supply, you agree to a lot of things without hesitation. The kingdom grew. Refugees streamed in from territories wrecked by machine beasts, drawn by the zero-tax settlement policy and the rumor that our king could summon a giant robot. Edgar unlocked new sections of the Atlantis base every few weeks, each one containing technology that reduced him to incoherent babbling for days. The instant ramen from the base kitchen became inexplicably popular among the soldiers. I did not question it. Morale was morale. A hippo-type machine beast surfaced near a southern mining settlement. Helena and I killed it in 20 minutes. On the flight home, neither of us said what we were both thinking. The beasts were coming faster now. The intervals between attacks were shrinking. A week later, I visited Garrett at the Hunter Association branch in the capital and asked him to build a continent-wide reporting network for metal monster sightings. He agreed immediately. The pattern was unmistakable. Almina's was sending more of them. Everyone we destroyed, another appeared somewhere else. She was testing us, probing, measuring how fast we responded and how much force we deployed. An enemy gathering intelligence was an enemy preparing for something larger. The report arrived during a budget meeting. A man at the northern border claiming to be the rightful heir of Ironhold County, demanding entry and an audience with the king. I knew who it was before the messenger finished speaking. Fritz had abandoned whatever post the Greenwall Knights had assigned him and walked to my kingdom's front door. The border guards described a thin, dirty young man delivering a speech about blood rights and stolen inheritance to 2 sentries who had never heard of Ironhold County. He had been talking for 40 minutes when they sent word. I had him arrested. He was still talking when they locked the cell. The guards reported he continued through dinner and into the following morning, explaining at length that everything I had built was rightfully his, that our mother would have wanted him to rule, and that I had stolen his destiny. A Greenwall envoy arrived the next day to collect him. I signed the transfer papers without looking up from the budget ledger. I felt nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, not even the weary amusement I had expected. Fritz was a footnote, a cockroach that wandered into the kitchen and got swept out before it reached the counter. The family that discarded me had produced exactly one person worth remembering, and she had been a 50-meter metal golem I already killed. I went back to the budget meeting. Salt revenues were up 14%. Helena and I took a day off. The Atlantis base had a private beach built into the cavern system beneath the ocean. White sand, clear water, artificial sunlight, warm enough to forget you were underground. I lay with my eyes closed and listened to Helena turning pages beside me. "The Eastern Reconstruction Report is 3 weeks ahead of schedule," she said. "We are on vacation." "I know. I am just mentioning it." I opened one eye. She was reading the reconstruction report on the beach. She smiled and did not put it down. That was Helena. The girl who had once sold slime cores to survive now ran half a kingdom from a towel. I loved her in a way that had nothing to do with romance novels and everything to do with watching someone become exactly who they were supposed to be. But the quiet did not last inside my head. A man in the capital slums had accepted power he could not control. By the time Helena and I arrived, there had been nothing left to save, just a metal shape that had once been human, and the empty space where a life used to be. The orbs were still spreading. Almina's was somewhere at the South Pole, hiding, rebuilding, feeding her weapons into the hands of desperate people who did not know what they were swallowing. The kingdom was growing. So were the shadows. I sat up and looked at the water. Beneath this ocean, the Atlantis base hummed with technology, built by a civilization that had fought exactly this kind of threat. They had lost. I had their weapons, their base, their robot. I had a wife who piloted her own. I had an inventor who understood their systems better every day. I had a kingdom with revenue, military strength, and allies. I intended to do better than they did. Helena glanced over. She had put the report down. "You have that look," she said. "What look?" "The one where you are planning something that will give Wallace a headache." I lay back on the sand and closed my eyes. "Several things," I said. The report came in at breakfast. Helena set down her tea. I set down my toast. The navigation console was already pulsing amber at the center of the room, and the holographic continent map had a new marker blinking over the Greenwall capital. Red, expanding. The messenger was a Greenwall border rider who had ridden through the night. He delivered his report in fragments because his hands would not stop shaking. The capital was gone. The royal palace, the merchant district, the cathedral, the garrison, the outer wall. Gone, frozen, and then collapsed. The king and the royal family were missing, presumed dead. I asked the obvious question. What did it? He said it was a golem, 50 meters tall, made of dark metal, radiating cold so intense that buildings shattered before the thing even touched them. It had walked out of the prison district at dawn, and by noon, the capital was rubble. I knew who it was before he finished. Fritz. Of course it was Fritz. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. The bass hummed its usual low frequency. The toast was getting cold. Somewhere in the back of my mind, a part of me that was still a middle-aged salaryman wanted to laugh at the cosmic irony. We had handed Fritz to Greenwall the way you hand off a problem employee to another department. Paperwork filed, hands washed. Not our problem anymore. And just like every problem employee I had ever seen transferred instead of fired, he had become someone else's catastrophe. Helena looked at me across the map table. She did not need to ask. I could see her running the same calculation I was. Fritz had been in Greenwall custody, a dungeon cell, stone walls, guards, harmless. We had handed him over like returning a lost package, and now the package had detonated. A blue orb. It had to be. Almina's was still sending them from the south, targeting anyone radiating enough hatred to attract one through stone walls. Fritz qualified. Fritz had been qualifying since the day he was born. I pulled up the continent map and zoomed in. The Greenwall capital was a dead zone, frost signatures spreading outward in every direction. And south of it, moving toward our border, a cluster of smaller contacts, machine beasts, dozens of them. He has an army, Helena said. He had an army. Wallace arrived within the hour, already carrying ledgers. That was the thing about Wallace. You never had to tell him a crisis was expensive. He just showed up with the numbers. I gave orders the way I used to assign project milestones. Clear deliverables, clear owners, clear deadlines. Helena would take the Eastern Front. Machine beasts were pushing in from the old Thornfield border, and she knew that terrain from the hippo hunt. She would hold the line with Beauty 4 and whatever ground forces Anton could mobilize. Wallace would handle logistics, evacuations, supply chains, medical stations. He had managed the treasury through the Starker crisis, the Shark crisis, and the Rat crisis. This was the same job at a larger scale. I would handle the rest. The northern incursion, the western approach, and Fritz himself. The plan was simple because Fritz was simple. He had power now, but power without tactics is just a tantrum with a bigger radius. Clear the machine beast army first. Isolate Fritz. End it. Helena kissed me at the door of the command room. Quick, efficient, the way she did everything when the continent was on fire. Then she was gone, flying east before the sun cleared the horizon. I suited up and went north. The northern front was the worst. 40 machine beasts, ranging from wolf-sized to the mass of a 2-story building, had crossed the border overnight and were chewing through farmland. not eating it, just destroying it. They had no strategy. They were weapons pointed in a direction and told to walk. I landed Apollon Kaiser in front of the largest cluster and started working, the same way I used to work through a backlog of unread emails, systematically, starting with the largest problems, moving to the smallest. It was not a battle, it was pest control. The wolf-sized ones went down in single strikes. The larger ones took 2 or 3. I cleared the first wave in under an hour, flew west to intercept a second column, pushing toward the trade road, and destroyed that one by early afternoon. The third group had combined into a single writhing mass, fusing their bodies into a shape that was supposed to be threatening. I found the seam where the fusion was weakest, drove Kaiser's spear through it, and the whole thing came apart like a bad weld. By dusk, the northern and western fronts were clear. I had destroyed 63 machine beasts across 400 kilometers of border. My body was not tired. Apollon Kaiser did not get tired, but my mind was running on the fumes of a patience that had been thinning for years. Reports from Helena came through the navigation console, Eastern Front holding. She had destroyed 28 machine beasts by mid-afternoon. Anton had evacuated 3 border towns without losing a single civilian. Wallace's supply lines were running on schedule. The kingdom held because we had spent 3 years building it to hold. Every road Anton laid, every supply depot Wallace funded, every garrison Helena drilled, all of it was paying off now. The system worked because we had built it to work. Fritz had not built anything. Fritz destroyed things. That was the difference between us, and it was the only one that mattered. I flew to the Greenwall capital the next morning. It was worse than the reports describe. Not because the damage was shocking. I had seen what a machine titan could do to a city. Cordelia had done the same thing to the Rosewind Plains. What made this worse was how petty it was. Fritz had not destroyed the capital to conquer it. He had destroyed it to punish it. The noble district was flattened. The merchant quarter where the moneylenders worked was frozen solid. The prison he had escaped from was obliterated so thoroughly that the foundation stones were powder. Every target was personal. Every ruin was a grudge. The streets were coated in frost so thick it cracked under Apollon Kaiser's feet. Buildings had not been knocked down. They had been frozen from the inside out, the water in the stone expanding until the walls burst. I passed what had been a bakery. The sign was still legible, hanging from one hinge, the letters glazed in white. Next to it, a children's shoe frozen to the cobblestones. I did not look at it for long. Silence everywhere. The kind of silence that meant everyone who could run had run, and everyone who could not had stopped making sound. I had heard this silence once before, in the aftermath of Cordelia's rampage. It sounded exactly the same. The Ironhold family had a talent for leaving this specific kind of quiet behind them. Ashford found me in the wreckage of the Palace District. He had survived by being outside the capital when Fritz hit. His coat was dusted with frost, and his face looked 10 years older than the last time I had seen him. He knelt in the rubble, not a bow, a pledge. He said the Greenwall Kingdom was finished as an independent state. The king was dead. The royal family was scattered. The capital was ice. He offered the remnants of his territory and his military experience to New Rosewind. I told him to stand up. He was a proud man. Kneeling in rubble did not suit him. He stood, dusted frost from his knees, then asked me, very simply, to destroy Fritz. I was already planning to, I said. I found Fritz 30 kilometers south of the capital, standing in a frozen wasteland he had made himself. Everything within a kilometer of him was white. Trees, rocks, earth, all glazed in ice that reflected the moonlight like a mirror. The temperature dropped so fast as I approached that the moisture in the air turned to crystals and fell like snow. He was enormous, taller than Cordelia had been, taller than King Aldrich. 50 meters of dark blue metal with frost crawling across every surface like living mold. His joints glowed with a pale white light that pulsed like breathing. The air around him shimmered with cold so intense it bent the moonlight into halos. Where his feet met the earth, the ground had turned to glass. This was the third machine titan I had faced. Fritz was just the one where the pattern became routine. He saw me and started talking. I could hear him through Apollon Kaiser's audio feed, ranting. The same speech he had been giving since he was 14. The inheritance was his. The county was his. Everything Adrian had built was stolen from him. He would freeze the continent. He would rule what was left. He would make everyone pay. I had heard this speech from Cordelia. Different words, same emptiness. Yes, in my past life, I had worked with a guy who blamed every failed project on everyone else in the department. 12 years of missed deadlines, and he never once considered that the common factor was him. Fritz was that guy with the power to freeze a city. Same delusion, bigger radius. I did not answer him. I had answered Fritz enough times for one lifetime. In the ceremony hall, in the letters he never read, in the county I rebuilt after he wrecked it. In every silent year I spent building what he spent tearing down. There was nothing left to say, so I said nothing. I advanced. Fritz threw everything first. A wave of cold hit Apollon Kaiser like a wall. Not wind, not ice. Pure thermal annihilation. The temperature plummeted past anything this world could produce naturally. Frost crawled across Kaiser's chest plate, across the arm joints, across the visor. The cockpit temperature readout dropped so fast, the numbers blurred. In the anime, the writers called it absolute zero. The real thing was not far off. Fritz had the power to drain heat from anything he touched, anything near him, anything he decided should stop moving. It was impressive by medieval standards. It was the strongest attack any human on this continent had ever produced. Apollon Kaiser was designed for space combat. Space is colder than Fritz. The ice on the armor cracked, then shattered. The internal furnace, the one I had used against Cordelia, the super compressed solar core buried in Kaiser's chest, pushed outward, not an attack, just heat. The temperature equalized in a ring around me, the frost retreating like a tide. Fritz screamed something about bloodlines. I closed the distance. He raised an ice barrier. I punched through it. He raised another. I punched through that one too. He tried to freeze me directly, pouring every degree of cold his blue orb body could produce into a focused beam aimed at Kaiser's chest. The furnace absorbed it, converted it, pushed it back as radiant heat that made the frozen ground hiss and steam. Fritz was swinging now, massive metal arms carving through the air, slow, powerful, but slow. I had fought Cordelia, who was faster. I had fought the combined machine beast mass, which was more unpredictable. Fritz was just big and angry. Every punch telegraphed, every ice attack the same shape. I caught his arm on the backswing and twisted. Metal screamed. His shoulder joint cracked. He stumbled. "You stole everything from me," he managed. The words came through the audio feed distorted by static and rage. I did not correct him. I was done correcting Fritz. I had been done for years. He threw a wild haymaker with his remaining good arm. I ducked under it, planted Kaiser's shoulder into his midsection, and shoved. Fritz went backward, boots carving trenches in the frozen earth. Ice shattered beneath him in sheets. He caught himself, raised both arms to generate a dome of cold around us, trying to turn the entire battlefield into a freezer. The furnace pulsed. The dome cracked before it formed. Frost turned to water, turned to steam. We stood in a cloud of white vapor, lit orange from below. He tried the same thing Cordelia had tried. He stopped fighting. His massive metal body sagged. The ice attacks ceased. His voice dropped from screaming to something smaller, something that was supposed to sound broken. He begged. He said he was sorry. He said he did not mean for the capital to be destroyed. He said the orb made him do it. He said he was still Adrian's brother. He said if I let him go, he would leave the continent, go somewhere far away, never come back. He said he just wanted to live. Cordelia had tried the same thing. I did not give Fritz the second she got. He was still talking when I activated the furnace at full output. The solar core in Kaiser's chest compressed, ignited, and released in a single concentrated burst aimed directly at his center mass. The heat hit him like a fist made of sunlight. His ice armor sublimated. His chest plate glowed white, then red, then transparent. The blue orb at his core, the thing Alminus had sent, the borrowed power that turned a spoiled air into a weapon, was visible for one instant through the melting metal. Then it was not. Fritz stopped existing, not dramatically, not in stages. The orb cracked, the metal lost cohesion, and what was left collapsed into slag that hissed against the frozen ground. Steam rose in a column visible for miles. The temperature normalized. The wind picked up. I stood in the crater and listened to the silence. The frozen wasteland was already melting. Water trickled through the cracks in the ground, running downhill toward what used to be a forest. By morning, This would be a muddy field. By next month, grass. That was done. I sat in the cockpit for a while after, not because I needed to, because I was processing. Fritz was dead, permanently. The orb was destroyed, which meant no regeneration, no second transformation, no third act. The cockroach was gone. I waited for something to arrive. Grief, maybe. Satisfaction, anger, closure, some emotion appropriate to killing your own brother, even a brother who had sent assassins, raised taxes to destroy lives, allied with an alien empress, and frozen a capital city because people in it had once refused him alone. Nothing came. I thought about the first time I saw Fritz. He was 11, standing in the ceremony hall, smirking at me while our father announced my exile. He was so certain he had won. Certain the way only someone who has never earned anything can be. Every moment after that, every assassination attempt, every army, every machine titan form was Fritz trying to recapture that feeling of easy superiority. And every moment he failed because the superiority was never real. He never learned. That was the tragedy of Fritz, if you wanted to call it a tragedy. He had every opportunity to build something, to grow, to become a person worth knowing. Instead, he spent his entire life trying to destroy the brother who left and never looked back. I thought about what would have happened if I had killed him back then, years ago, when he invaded with his pathetic army and his soldiers deserted on sight. I could have. Nobody would have objected. The law allowed it. But I exiled him instead because executing a 14-year-old for being stupid felt wrong. And then I thought about the Greenwall Capital, the bakery sign, the frozen shoe, the silence. All of it because I chose mercy over pragmatism, twice. I ran a damage diagnostic on a Pollen Kaiser, minor frost scoring on the outer plating, nothing structural, 30 minutes in the repair bay. I turned the robot toward home and flew south. Helena was already back when I landed. She had cleared the Eastern Front, secured the border, and made it home in time to eat. She was sitting at the dining table with a bowl of the instant ramen the soldiers had gotten addicted to. She looked up when I walked in, read my face, slid the second bowl across the table without a word. I sat down. "Fritz?" she asked. "Done," she nodded, not celebrating, not mourning, just acknowledging that a task on a very long list had been completed. She understood. She had killed her own father in that machine titan form. She knew what the silence afterward felt like. She knew there was nothing useful to say about it. We ate in quiet. The ramen was hot. The bass hummed around us. The same low hum it had made every night since we moved in. Constant, indifferent to what happened above it. Somewhere below, Edgar was probably still in his laboratory, unaware that a war had started and finished while he calibrated instruments. The base did not care about Fritz. The base had outlived a civilization that built robots and lost a war. It would outlive this too. Ashford pledged his territory, I said between bites. Her eyebrows went up, just slightly. The political calculation was already running behind her eyes. Greenwall's remnants plus the Thornfield territory we had absorbed during the Beast incursion. That was 4 kingdoms now, formally or informally, under New Rosewind's umbrella. "We are going to need a bigger map," she said. I looked at the wall where the holographic projector could display the continent. She was right. The territory we administered now was 4 times what it had been 6 months ago. The ramen was good. The base was warm. Fritz would never knock on another door, or send another assassin, or destroy another city. For the first time since the ceremony hall, since the day my father said the word exile and my brother smiled, I did not have to think about Fritz ever again. I finished the bowl, washed it in the sink because old habits survive dimensional travel, and went to bed. But tonight, the continent was quiet. Helena was reading reports beside me, her feet tucked under the blanket, a pen behind her ear. I closed my eyes, slept clean. No dreams about brothers or ice or things that should have been different. It was over. 3 days after we buried the Fritz chapter for good, a report landed on my desk that made my hands stop moving. Twin hunters, operating out of a backwater village near the northern border. Low rank, low profile, 0 reputation. But their combat logs showed energy discharge patterns that no sword skill or fire magic could explain. The local guild clerk had flagged them as anomalies and forwarded the file to Wallace, who forwarded it to me. Their skill names were listed at the bottom of the page. Stormhawk 4, Iron Mouse 3. I read those names twice. Then I read them a third time because my pulse was doing something it had not done since the day I climbed into a Pollen Kaiser's cockpit. Helena looked up from her own stack of papers. "You have that face again. What face? She set her pen down. The one where you have already decided something and you are pretending to still be thinking about it. She was right. I was already calculating travel time. Mia and Mia were 19. Identical faces, identical builds, identical expressions of cautious distrust when I walked onto their training ground with no escort and no crown. I understood the distrust. They had spent their entire careers being told their skills were nonsense. Stormhawk 4, Iron Mouse 3, names that meant nothing to anyone in this world. Guild examiners had shrugged. Party leaders had declined them. Other hunters had laughed. Sound familiar? I did not explain what their skills actually were. Not yet. I used the same framing I had used with Helena years ago. Ancient metal golems. Lost technology. Incredible power locked behind a training wall that nobody else knew how to climb. Mia narrowed her eyes. And you know how to climb it. I climbed it myself. So did my wife. We can show you. Mia glanced at her sister. Some silent twin language passed between them. Then Mia looked back at me. What is the catch? You become Knights of New Rosewind. You train full time. You follow my methods exactly. I paused. And you stop hiding what you can do. They agreed before I finished the sentence. Training the twins was a compressed replay of everything Helena and I had lived through, minus the exile and the near-death experiences. I started them on slimes with beam weaponry, the same way I had started myself years ago in a field outside a city where nobody knew my name. They chewed through the low ranks in days. Their combat instincts were sharp, raw, undisciplined, but sharp. Years of surviving as ridiculed hunters had given them reflexes that training alone could not teach. Iron turtles fell next, then silver slimes in the mountains, where the real experience poured in and levels climbed like stock tickers during a bull run. Helena supervised their combat drills while I handled the technical curriculum. She was patient with them in ways she had never been patient with herself, correcting stances, adjusting timing, pushing them harder when they slowed down, and pulling them back when they pushed too far. The anime's training progression held true. Whoever had embedded these skills into this world system had followed the source material faithfully. Wallace gained a new skill during the silver slime hunts: Minister of Finance. I stared at the notification for a full 10 seconds before deciding that this world's skill system had a deeply specific sense of humor. Edgar, meanwhile, had unsealed 3 new wings of the Atlantis base. His research teams were cataloging technology we did not yet understand. His son, 10 years old, and already writing code that the base's own artificial intelligence approved as improvements, had been caught modifying the training simulations. The modifications were better than what the original system provided. I filed that under problems for later and kept my focus on the twins. Weeks compressed into a rhythm: train, hunt, level, sleep, train again. The twins did not complain. They had spent years being told they were useless. Now someone was telling them they were valuable and they were not going to waste it. Mia hit level 1000 on a Tuesday. Mia hit it 11 minutes later. I knew what was coming. I had felt it myself at that threshold, the dimensional pull, the skill resonating with something beyond the system's normal architecture. I told them both to stand in the center of the hangar and focus. Mia went first. The air above her split open like torn fabric, light pouring through in colors that did not belong to this world's spectrum. Something descended through the rift, sleek, angular, built for speed and altitude. Wings swept back like a hawk diving, cockpit canopy gleaming. Stormhawk 4, an aerial combat mecha from episode 47 of the original anime. I had owned the model kit. I had painted it by hand on a Saturday afternoon in my old apartment. It was real. It was here. Mia's summon followed immediately. The ground trembled. Iron Mouse 3 rose through a secondary rift, squat and armored and bristling with turret mounts. A ground assault tank mecha from the same series, heavy plating, low center of gravity, built to take hits that would flatten a building and keep rolling. I was grinning. I could feel it on my face, and I did not care. Helena caught my expression, and something softened in her eyes because she remembered. She remembered the day I had looked at Apollon Kaiser the same way. 4 pilots, I said. My voice cracked slightly, and I did not care about that either. We have 4 pilots. The anime's original combat squad had 4 units: a command mech, a support mech, an aerial fighter, and a ground tank. Now, the squad existed, in a world that had laughed at every one of us for having these skills. Helena put her hand on my shoulder. Breathe. I breathed, but I was still grinning. 2 months passed. The kingdom machinery ran the way machinery should when competent people operate it. Wallace managed the treasury with the precision of a man whose skill was literally called Minister of Finance. Tax collection was fair. Construction budgets balanced. Monster hunting funded the gaps. And Helena and I still spent 3 days a week in the field grinding silver slimes because the kingdom's economy ran on magic stone revenue faster than any other income stream could grow. Edgar's teams cracked the Atlantis base's orbital construction protocols. The base had been designed to support infrastructure beyond the planet's surface, launch systems, orbital platforms, resource delivery mechanisms. Everything pointed to one conclusion: the ancient civilization that built this base had operated on the moon. I authorized the project the same afternoon, not because I wanted a moon base, because Alminus was hiding somewhere I could not find on the surface, and orbital surveillance was the next logical step. Edgar built the rocket in 6 weeks. His son helped with the navigation programming. I flew it personally because delegating a moon landing felt wrong in ways I could not articulate. The moon was barren, empty. No atmosphere, no life, no enemies. Just gray dust and silence stretching to every horizon. But the Atlantis base's construction systems worked in low gravity, and within days, we had the skeleton of a monitoring station rising from the regolith. Surveillance arrays, communication relays, sensor coverage that would blanket the continent below. When Alminas moved, we would see it. On the second night, Helena and I stood in the observation dome and looked down at the planet, blue and green, and impossibly small, like something you could hold in your hand if your hand were large enough. She leaned against my shoulder. "We came a long way from slime hunting," she said. I did not answer. Some distances are too large for words. The collapse happened the way collapses always happen, slowly, then all at once. Eastwall and Northridge had been rotting from the inside for years. Corrupt ministers, incompetent rulers, 90% tax rates that drove their citizens across our borders as refugees. We had been absorbing those refugees for months, giving them land, houses, tax exemptions, the basics of a functional government. They came in thousands. Almost none went back. Then the blue orbs arrived. A general from Northridge, wrongly imprisoned by his own kingdom's corrupt politics, accepted one out of rage. He transformed into a machine titan and marched what remained of his soldiers toward our border, mechanical beasts flanking his advance information. Mia and Mia scrambled their mechs for the first real combat deployment. I watched from the command center as Stormhawk 4 dove from altitude and tore through the aerial machine beast units with a precision that made my chest tight with something between pride and memory. Iron Mouse 3 anchored the ground defense, Mia's turrets methodical and calm. They fought like they had been doing this for years, not weeks. Helena and I deployed to clean up what remained. The general did not survive. His soldiers, the ones still human, surrendered on sight. That battle was the last straw for both kingdoms. Their armies were gone. Their economies were gone. Their citizens were gone. Surviving nobles sent formal requests for annexation because the alternative was governing empty farmland with no one left to farm it. I dispatched Helena to Eastwall. I took Northridge personally. Both operations completed in 2 days. No sieges, no battles, no resistance. We rolled in with motorized military columns, posted new governance structures, and started rebuilding. 2 days, 2 kingdoms. I had spent longer waiting for printer repairs at my old company. The international conference was Helena's domain. The remaining independent kingdoms convened to address the problem of New Rosewind's expansion. Their word, not mine. Problem. Helena attended as our diplomatic representative. She sat through 3 days of declarations, threats, demands for territorial concessions, proposals for military containment, and one especially creative suggestion that we voluntarily dissolve our kingdom and redistribute our territory among the attendees. She listened politely. She declined everything. She came home. "How was it?" I asked. Her expression said everything. They spent 2 hours arguing about seating arrangements before the first session started. The Northridge delegation demanded representation, even though Northridge no longer exists. The East Wall ambassador tried to invoice us for refugee housing costs. She set her travel bag down. They have no unified military, no economic leverage, no moral authority. They cannot agree on what to eat for lunch, let alone how to contain a kingdom with 4 giant robots and a moon base. So, nothing changes. Nothing changes. The conference produced a joint statement condemning New Rosewind's territorial expansion. The statement was delivered to our embassy by courier. Wallace used it as a coaster. We paraded through the annexed territories in our mechs, all 4 of them. Helena and I had discussed whether a victory parade in giant robots was excessive. We concluded that it was absolutely excessive and did it anyway, because stability required visibility, and visibility required spectacle. Apollon Kaiser led the column. Beauty 4 flanked right, rose gold trim catching the midday sun. Stormhawk 4 flew overhead in slow passes, low enough that the wind from its engines rattled shutters. Iron Mouse 3 rumbled through the streets behind us, Mia waving from the open turret hatch with a grin that could be seen from 3 blocks away. People lined the roads. Some cheered, some stared. A few children pointed and shouted words I could not hear from inside the cockpit. Most of the adults just watched with the cautious relief of citizens who had survived their own government's collapse and were calculating whether the new one would be worse. It would not be. I had Wallace's budget projections to prove it. Afterward, Helena suggested we travel incognito to survey the outer territories. Reasonable plan. Practical. Impossible, as it turned out, because our faces were on government posters in every town square. The administration had been thorough, too thorough. We could fly, Helena offered, so we flew. Stormhawk 4 carried us above the clouds, over kingdoms that had once mocked a boy with a useless skill, and a girl with an even more useless one. Below us, the continent spread wide and complicated, and ours to manage whether we had wanted it or not. The empire was continental now, multiple kingdoms absorbed, 4 mecha pilots operational, a moon base providing orbital coverage, an economy that actually worked. But the bigger the empire grew, the bigger the target it painted on itself. Alminas was still building power somewhere I could not yet see. The remaining kingdoms were afraid, and afraid rulers made desperate choices. Somewhere out there, someone was already planning how to tear down what we had built. I watched the clouds pass below us and let the thought settle. The empire was growing. The threats were growing faster. I would find the threat before it found us. But first, we had a continent to run. Helena's idea, not mine. I would have spent the afternoon reading troop deployment reports and pretending that counted as relaxation. But she walked into my study, dropped a pair of plain traveling cloaks on the desk, and said we were going out. No guards, no titles, no circlet, just 2 people in a foreign city pretending to be nobody. Reich was the commercial heart of the Saxonbury Kingdom, and it showed. The main avenue was wider than some of our border roads, lined with market stalls selling everything from dried meats to enchanted lanterns. The buildings were old stone with painted shutters, the kind of place that looked prosperous from a distance and tired up close. Helena stopped at a spice vendor and held up a jar of something amber-colored, turning it in the light like it was a state document that needed a second opinion. "We should get 12 of these," she said. 12 for the kitchen staff. She was already counting jars. They have been complaining about the Northridge supply shipments. Even on a day off, she was running logistics. I bought the jars without arguing. A street vendor down the block was selling roasted skewers that smelled better than anything our palace cooks had managed in a month. We ate standing up, leaning against a stone wall, watching the crowd move past. Nobody looked twice at us. That was the part I had not expected to miss. Anonymity. The simple pleasure of being unremarkable. Helena tilted her head against my shoulder and closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds before straightening and pointing at a bookshop across the street. "You have 5 minutes, she said. "I saw you looking." I had 7 minutes worth of looking to do, but I took the 5. The slums were visible from the market district if you knew where to look. A half-mile south, the painted shutters gave way to bare wood and cramped alleys. I noticed because noticing was the only thing the salaryman in me never stopped doing. The recession had hit the outer districts hard. Empty storefronts. Beggars at the intersections the guards did not patrol. The kind of poverty that sits next to wealth and waits. Helena saw it too. She did not say anything. She did not need to. I did not learn his name until later. Dek, a young man from the slums who had been caring for his mother with medicine he could not afford. The potions that might have saved her cost more than he would earn in a year, and the clinics did not treat people from the lower district. She passed quietly in a room that smelled like herbs that had stopped working. He buried her alone. The next morning, he went looking for work, and every door in the merchant quarter closed the moment they heard which street he lived on. Not because he was unqualified, because he was from the wrong side of the city. The kind of rejection that does not shout at you. It just shrugs and moves on. The machinery is different here. The result is the same. A woman found him. Calm, articulate, unremarkable. The kind of person who blends into any room because she wants to. She offered him something that glowed blue, and she spoke to him with the patience of someone who had done this before. He took it. By the next morning, the slums had a new kind of monster. The reports reached us before the sound did. A mechanical giant had appeared in the merchant district, tearing through buildings with the kind of precision that was worse than mindless destruction. It targeted the wealthy quarters first, the duke's estate, the banking houses, the guild halls where men in silk had told a young man from the slums that they were not hiring. Helena and I were already moving when the Saxonbury army arrived, or what passed for an army. The local duke, a man named Barlow, who wore more gold than his soldiers wore armor, positioned his troops and informed us, with the polite firmness of someone who has never been in actual danger, that Saxonbury would handle its own problems. I looked at Helena, she looked at me. We went home. Not because we agreed with him, because forcing our way into another kingdom's crisis would have given every nervous king on the continent exactly the excuse they needed. The empire that intervenes uninvited becomes the empire that conquers. I understood the politics. I hated them. The Duke did not survive his own stubbornness. The machine titan followed him to the capital and dismantled everything he had built his wealth on. By the time the Saxonbury government fell, there was nothing left to govern. We went back, not as tourists this time. The Titan was waiting in the ruins, 40 meters of dark metal and fury, with 4 whip-like tentacles that moved faster than anything that size should have been able to produce. They deflected beam attacks, swatted missiles out of the air, and wrapped around Apollon Kaiser's arm before I could pull back. I made the call, sacrificed the outer armor plating to lock the tentacles in place, buying Helena 3 seconds. She did not need 3. Beauty 4's blade took the core in one clean strike, and the Titan crumpled. It whispered one word before the light went out: Mother. I sat in the cockpit for a long time after that. The blue orbs do not create monsters. They find people the world already broke. Dek had not wanted power. He had wanted his mother to live. Everything that came after was grief wearing a metal shell. We annexed what was left of Saxonbury. Someone had to. The cost of rebuilding would take years, and the people who survived had nowhere else to go. Another kingdom absorbed. Another responsibility I had not asked for. The remaining kings met within the week. I was not invited. I was the agenda. King Varro of the Varro Kingdom convened the session, and from the intelligence our moon base relayed, he did most of the talking. His argument was simple and effective. 3 kingdoms absorbed. Saxonbury in ruins. New Rosewind's borders now touched nearly every independent territory on the continent. If they did not act together, they would be absorbed one by one. He was not wrong. That was the part that made it difficult to dismiss. The other kings hesitated. Old rivalries, old grudges, the usual reasons people refuse to cooperate until the fire is already at their door. One of them quietly opposed the alliance and was reported dead 2 days later. The details were not shared. They did not need to be. What none of them knew, and what I would not learn until much later, was that Varro's most trusted advisor had been steering him for months. A calm, competent woman who provided intelligence reports, strategic assessments, and carefully reasoned arguments for why New Rosewind was the true threat to the continent. She had been in his court since before the Saxonbury crisis. She had positioned herself so perfectly that questioning her would have felt like questioning his own judgment. Her name, when it finally surfaced, was Meredith, one of Alminus's 4 generals, the hidden hand behind the coalition, the voice in the king's ear, the strategist who had turned fear into an army. I watched the troop movements on the holographic display. Varro's coalition was assembling faster than I had expected. 200,000 soldiers drawn from a dozen kingdoms, with supply lines and staging areas that suggested professional planning, not the work of a frightened king making desperate moves. Someone with real strategic training was behind the logistics. Helena stood beside me, reading the same projections. Neither of us spoke for a while. The blue light from the display cast the room in the kind of cold glow that makes everything feel like a briefing, even when you wish it were not. "He is being advised," she said. I nodded. The pattern was wrong for a coalition built on fear alone. Fear produces chaos. This was coordinated. 200,000, I said. Plus, whatever they are not showing us. She was quiet for a moment. Then she turned from the display and looked at me directly. When? Weeks, maybe less. The coalition did not need to defeat me. They needed to contain me, carve up the empire, and redistribute the pieces among themselves. Varro would take the technology. The others would take the territory. And Olminas, wherever she was, would watch it all burn and call it progress. I began positioning forces that night. The mech squad, the garrison deployments, the supply routes. Helena drafted the diplomatic responses that we both knew would be ignored. We worked side by side in the blue glow of the command center until the displays blurred and the coffee went cold. The war we had been preparing for was here. The rice paddies stretched to the horizon in rows so clean they looked drafted by an engineer, which they were. Edgar had designed the planting pattern himself, calculated the optimal spacing per stalk, and then spent 40 minutes explaining why his approach was 12% more efficient than the method farmers had used for 1,000 years. I had nodded at the right intervals and signed the deployment order for 300 enchanted tractors. Now, Helena and I stood on the earthen path between the flooded fields, watching green shoots push through still water, and I had the strangest feeling, contentment. "The southern districts will be self-sufficient by harvest," Helena said, bending to examine a seedling. "If we stabilize grain prices through the winter, the refugee camps in Saxonbury can start drawing from local surplus instead of capital shipments." Always 3 moves ahead. I watched her stand, brushing dirt from her hands, and realized she had already calculated the tonnage. "Edgar says the vehicle production line can handle 40 units a month," I said. 20 military transports, 20 civilian. If we redirect 10 of the civilian units to agricultural hauling, we can move the harvest faster than the roads can handle. She looked at me with that expression she used when I said something she had already thought of 2 days ago. "I submitted that request yesterday," she said. Of course she had. The contentment lasted exactly 1 month. Moon-based surveillance had been tracking movement along the southern border for weeks. Small columns at first, supply wagons, cavalry scouts, infantry companies marching under flags I did not recognize. Then, the columns stopped being small. The holographic display in the Atlantis Base Command Center painted the picture in pale blue light. 200,000 soldiers, a dozen kingdoms worth of banners, supply lines stretching back through 3 countries, professional logistics, coordinated staging, synchronized march timing. Helena had identified it weeks ago. Somebody behind that army knew what they were doing. Now the somebody had finished preparing, and the army was moving. "Forward elements crossed the border at dawn," Helena said, highlighting troop positions on the display. "Main body is 12 hours behind. They are heading for the northern corridor." I studied the formation. The coalition had numbers. We had 4 mechs, 50,000 soldiers with equipment 2 generations ahead of anything the coalition carried, and the Atlantis base feeding us real-time intelligence from orbit. On paper, the math was simple, but the intelligence feeds showed something else. A secondary cluster of heat signatures near Northtown, 50 miles behind the coalition's front line. 2 concentrated for a supply depot, 2 dispersed for a camp. "What is that?" I asked, pointing. Helena zoomed in. The signatures were scattered across what the map labeled as a minor settlement. No military formations, no siege equipment, just bodies gathered in one place. "A feast," she said. "Local nobles. Reports say they have been celebrating the coalition's advance for 3 days. A feast while 200,000 soldiers marched to war." I filed it under the long list of things that would not end well. We deployed. I took the northern corridor with Apollon Kaiser. Helena covered the eastern approach in Beauty 4. Mia launched Stormhawk for aerial reconnaissance over the full front. Mia anchored the ground defense at the central pass with Iron Mouse. 4 mechs, 50,000 soldiers against 200,000. The equipment difference would make it academic. I just did not know yet that the coalition's numbers were not the real threat. The distress signal came from Northtown before the coalition's main force even made contact. I pulled Apollon Kaiser out of the forward line and covered the 50 miles in minutes. Helena was already inbound from the east. We came in high, reading the smoke columns from altitude, and what I saw below did not match any battle plan the coalition had filed. Northtown was not under siege. It was being destroyed from inside. The buildings were rubble, the streets were craters, and standing in the wreckage, 3 machine titans were tearing apart what remained. 40-meter metal bodies, the kind I had put down before, blue energy pulsing at their joints. Around them, a dozen machine beasts were rampaging through the outer districts, smaller, faster, animalistic. The whole town was being eaten alive. Blue orbs, Alminas had seeded them into the celebration. The nobles at that feast had accepted the orbs, and by the time I arrived, the town was rubble, and the people who had been inside were gone. 3 titans, 12 beasts, Helena reported over the comm. Her voice was flat, combat flat. The beasts are spreading east. Contain the beasts. I will take the titans. I dropped Apollon Kaiser into the valley and engaged. The first titan swung at me with an arm the size of a building. I caught it, redirected the force into the ground, and put my fist through its chest. The core shattered on impact. The titan collapsed like a puppet whose strings had been cut. Metal screamed against stone. The second one charged. I sidestepped, grabbed the back of its head, and drove it face first into the river. Held it there. Counted to 3. When I pulled my hand back, the blue glow was gone. The third tried to run. Apollon Kaiser's missile fingers tracked it across 2 city blocks. 3 impacts. The titan stopped running. Helena cleared the beasts in the time it took me to finish the titans. Beauty 4 was built for speed and precision. She threaded through the narrow streets, each strike clean, each target down before it could turn. We had done this before. The coordination was reflex by now. We cleared them in minutes. I stood Apollon Kaiser in the center of Northtown's ruined square and surveyed the damage. Rubble, smoke, silence. The coalition had not sent these machine titans. Alminas had planted them here as a trap, a second front designed to pull me away from the battle line while the conventional army advanced. I was about to order a return to the front when a voice cut through the silence, calm, almost pleasant, coming from somewhere in the wreckage below. She walked out of the rubble like she was arriving at a meeting she had scheduled. A woman, young, unremarkable face, the kind you would forget 5 minutes after seeing it. Dark auburn hair, modest blue dress, hands folded behind her back. She stepped over a fallen beam, avoided a puddle of molten metal, and looked up at Apollon Kaiser's 50-meter frame with an expression of polite curiosity. I knew instantly that she was not a survivor. She spoke, and her voice carried across the ruined square with unnatural clarity. The words were addressed to me, but the tone was the kind you used when speaking to an audience. She thanked me for destroying the machine titans so efficiently. She said their wreckage was exactly what she had been waiting for. She introduced herself by title, one of the Empress's 4 generals, the one who had been advising King Vero, the one who had built the coalition from inside his own court, Meredith. Helena's voice came over the comm, sharp and immediate. Adrian, that is the strategist, the advisor, the puppet master who had steered Voro into assembling 200,000 soldiers, the one whose professional logistics and coordinated staging had Helena flagging an invisible hand behind the coalition for months. She had been sitting in Vero's court the entire time, wearing that forgettable face, pulling every string, and she was standing in a field of mechanical wreckage. She moved before I could. Her body changed, not the slow, agonizing transformation of a human taking a blue orb, something mechanical, efficient. The modest dress dissolved. Her arms split into cables that shot outward, latching onto every piece of destroyed machine titan within 100 meters. Metal screamed as it was pulled inward. Broken limbs, shattered torsos, fractured armor plating, the debris of the beasts Helena had killed. All of it flew toward her like iron filings to a magnet. The mass grew, 20 meters, 30, 40, 50, larger. When it stopped, What stood in the center of Northtown was not a machine titan. Machine titans were crude, humanoid shapes made of dark metal, powered by blue orbs, dumb and strong. This was different. This was engineered. A giant mecha with organic mechanical proportions, dark gunmetal plating that shifted and rippled like a living surface, joints that moved with precision instead of force, a face that was not a face, just a smooth, dark visor where eyes should have been, reflecting the smoke. Neo Meredith. I hit her with everything Apollon Kaiser had. My fist went through her torso. Clean hit. The kind that had ended every machine titan I had ever fought. I pulled back and watched the hole close. Metal flowed like liquid, filling the gap in less than 2 seconds. The surface sealed. No scar, no damage, like I had punched water. I hit her again, same result. Helena came in from the east and carved a line across her shoulder with Beauty 4's boomerang blades. The cut sealed before Beauty 4 completed the pass. The next strike took her head off. She grew it back. New metal surged upward from the body, reforming the featureless visor, the dark plating, the exact proportions. 5 seconds, maybe less. She is pulling material from the field, Helena said. I could hear it in her voice. Not panic, analysis. Every piece of wreckage we created is feeding her. She was right. The destroyed machine titans, the broken beasts, the collapsed buildings with their iron supports, the weapons and armor scattered across the battlefield. Every piece of metal within range was fuel. Every time I damaged her, the debris field replenished what I had broken. And every time I broke her, I created more debris. I was feeding the enemy by fighting her. Retreat was the only option left. She did not pursue. She stood in the center of the ruined town, 60 meters tall now, and waited, patient. She did not need to chase me. She just needed to exist, growing larger, becoming more unkillable, while the coalition army continued its advance on the other front. She was buying time, and every second I spent here was a second the real war moved forward without me. Helena pulled alongside Apollon Kaiser, and we hovered at a distance, watching. My mind was running through options and discarding them as fast as they arrived. More firepower was useless. She ate it. Physical destruction was useless. She rebuilt from it. Running was not an option. Leaving a regenerating giant mecha behind our lines was suicide. Then the salaryman in me went quiet, and the otaku spoke up. Every regenerating enemy in the Apollon Kaiser anime had a core. I sat in the cockpit and let the thought settle. Season 2, Episode 14. The regenerating fortress of the Andromeda Core. A mecha that could rebuild itself from any available material, absorbing wreckage, growing larger, seemingly invincible. The heroes hit it for 11 minutes of screen time before the strategist character noticed that one component never moved, never shifted position, never regenerated, because it did not need to. It was the source, the core. If the anime's logic held in this world, and it had held for every other ability my skill had produced, then Neo Meredith had one. A single component that powered the regeneration, attracted the material, held the whole structure together. Destroy the core, and the regeneration dies. The body collapses. Everything she had absorbed becomes inert scrap. I open the comm. Helena, stop attacking. Watch her. Tell me what does not move. Silence for 3 seconds. Then Helena's voice, careful and precise. Watching. Neo Meredith shifted in the wreckage, absorbing another collapsed building's iron framework. Her body rippled and reconfigured. Arms lengthened, shoulders broadened, plating thickened. Everything moved. Everything changed. Center of the chest, Helena said. There is a glow. It has not shifted once since she formed. Everything rebuilds around it, but it stays fixed. I saw it the moment she said it. A pale blue-white light buried deep behind the chest plating, stationary, anchored, the only fixed point in a body made entirely of moving parts. That is the core. How do you know? Because I have watched this exact episode. A pause. Then Helena, with the tone of a woman who had long since stopped being surprised by which of my old world skills turned out to be the important one. What is the plan? The plan was simple. Simple plans survived contact with 60-meter regenerating mecha. Complex ones did not. Cold Flash. I had unlocked it during the Dark Dragon fight years ago and sealed it away as too destructive for anything short of a disaster. A technique from the anime's 3rd season. absolute zero energy projected outward from Apollon Kaiser's hands. It did not cut. It did not burn. It froze. Molecular level cessation. Anything it touched stopped being a material that could be moved, shaped, or absorbed. It became inert, dead weight. She could not rebuild from ice. I charged. She responded the way she had been responding. Her arms extended into cable whips, each one thick as a bridge support, lashing toward me. I caught two with Apollon Kaiser's left hand and froze them on contact. The cables turned white, then gray, then shattered like glass. Dead metal, useless to her. She recoiled. For the first time since she had formed, something about her body language changed. Not pain, recognition. She understood that this was different. I did not give her time to adapt. I pressed forward, both hands projecting cold flash, freezing a corridor through her torso. The frozen metal could not regenerate, could not shift, could not be reclaimed. It was a tunnel of dead material cutting straight toward the core. She tried to fill the gap. New wreckage surged inward from the edges of the battlefield, but I was faster. The frozen corridor held, and Helena was already moving. Beauty 4 shot through the gap at full speed. The tunnel was narrow, 10 meters of frozen dead metal on either side, the core glowing at the far end. Helena did not slow down. She did not hesitate. She drove Beauty 4's blade arm into the core with everything the mech had. The light cracked. For 1 second, Neo Meredith's body locked in place. Every piece of metal, every cable, every regenerating surface stopped moving simultaneously. A tremor ran through the entire structure. The pale glow in the chest flickered once, twice, and went dark. Then she collapsed. All of her. 60 meters of assembled wreckage fell apart at once, crashing outward in a wave of dead metal that rolled across the ruined town like a landslide. Helena pulled Beauty 4 clear before the debris hit. I stood Apollon Kaiser firm and let the wave break against the armor. When the dust settled, a small form lay in the crater where the core had been. Not a giant mecha, not a machine titan, a mechanical construct no larger than a person. Dark metal, spindly, broken. The true body of one of Almina's 4 generals. It twitched once. I stepped on it. It stopped twitching. One general down. By the time Helena and I returned to the front, the coalition war was already over. 50,000 against 200,000. Our troops carried weapons Edgar's workshop had designed from Atlantis-based blueprints. Enchanted armor that deflected standard arrows. Communication crystals linked to a central command. Supply chains that ran on vehicles instead of wagons. The coalition had numbers. We had the rest. The coalition's forward elements had broken against Mia's defensive line at the central pass. Iron Mouse's turrets had turned the corridor into a graveyard of abandoned siege towers and shattered cavalry charges. Mia's Stormhawk had circled overhead, calling out flanking attempts before they formed, dropping precision strikes on command tents and supply depots until the logistics collapsed. The coalition army fought the way armies had always fought on this continent. Our 50,000 fought like they had been designed to win. When Apollon Kaiser and Beauty 4 appeared on the horizon, flying side by side back from Northtown, the coalition's remaining formations disintegrated. Commanders who had been holding their lines saw 2 giant robots descending toward them and made the only rational decision. They ran. Soldiers threw down weapons by the thousands. The ones who did not surrender fled south in a column that stretched for miles, shedding equipment as they went. Banners lay trampled in the mud. King Varro was not among the dead. He was not among the surrendered. Reports came in piecemeal over the next few hours. A small cavalry escort had broken through the southern route before our forces closed it. A dozen riders at most, moving fast, heading for the Varro kingdom. He had seen the battle turn and run before the route was complete. Smart enough to flee, not smart enough to have avoided the war in the first place. I went back to Northtown before returning to the capital. I do not know why. The battle was over. The war was won. There was nothing to do here that a reconstruction crew could not handle better. But I went anyway. The town was rubble. Apollon Kaiser's sensors had mapped the damage during the fight, but seeing it from the cockpit and seeing it at ground level were different things. I left the mech at the edge of town and walked in on foot. Stone walls collapsed into the streets, timber beams jutting from piles of brick like broken bones. The feast hall where the nobles had gathered was a crater. Everything within 50 meters was slag and ash. I found 2 survivors, a young woman and her brother, huddled in the cellar of a building that had somehow kept its foundation intact. They were covered in dust and shaking. The woman looked at me with an expression I had seen before, not gratitude, not relief, just the blank stare of someone whose world had changed shape and had not caught up yet. The field medics took them. I kept walking. Near the edge of town, an older man stood in the wreckage of what had probably been a manor, a former noble, one of the exiles who had settled here after their kingdoms collapsed. He was surveying the damage with the kind of calm that meant he had already decided what to do next. When he saw me, he straightened. He told me he intended to rebuild. He had the survivors. He had the land. The town was destroyed, but the location was still good. The river still flowed. The soil was still fertile. He asked if the crown would support the effort. I told him we would. I meant it. I had watched enough things break to know that the rebuilding was the part that mattered. The aftermath took shape over the following days. The coalition had ceased to exist. Of the dozen kingdoms that had contributed soldiers, most had lost the majority of their fighting force. Surrendered troops were processed, disarmed, and offered a choice. Stay in New Rosewind territory as civilians under our law, or walk home to kingdoms that no longer had armies to protect them. Most stayed. The southern countries that had formed the coalition's backbone collapsed into chaos. Governments that had emptied their treasuries to fund the war had nothing left to govern with. Refugees flooded northward. Our border camps, already strained from the Saxonbury annexation, buckled under the new weight. We sent teams south, not conquering armies, administrative units, engineers, supply wagons, magistrates. If the southern countries could not govern themselves, we would do it for them. Not because I wanted more territory, because a power vacuum on our southern border was an invitation for Almenas to fill it, and I had just watched what her blue orbs did to ungoverned populations. Helena handled the logistics with the efficiency that made me wonder whether she had been running countries in a previous life. Supply chains established in days. Provisional governors appointed from local leaders who had not joined the coalition. Tax rates set low enough to prevent revolt, high enough to fund reconstruction. Only King Varro remained. He had made it back to his kingdom with a handful of riders and was already making noise. Reports indicated he was imposing crushing taxes on his own people, conscripting replacements, merging smaller nations that had nowhere else to turn into his territory. The man had lost a war, and his response was to start building for the next one. The continent was splitting in two, New Rosewind and everything under our protection on one side, the Varro remnant on the other. I stood in the command center with Helena, watching the holographic map redraw itself as reports came in. The blue dots of our territory covered most of the continent. The red cluster in the east was Varro, and somewhere in the far south, below the mapped territories, below the known world, Almenas was still building. One general down. The remaining 3 were out there somewhere, and the Empress herself had watched her strategists die and done nothing. That was the part that worried me. Not Varro, not the refugees, not the reconstruction. The silence from the south. When someone that powerful stayed quiet, it meant they were not finished. Helena's hand found mine in the blue light. She did not say anything. She did not need to. We had survived the coalition. We had killed a general. We had held the continent together by force and logistics, and 4 robots that should not exist, and none of it was over. The intelligence reports came in clusters, like bad news always does. Varro had imposed a 90% tax on his remaining territories. Not a wartime levy, not a temporary measure, 90% across the board on every citizen in every district still under his flag. The refugees had started arriving at our eastern border within the first week, families carrying everything they owned in single bags, farmers who had planted crops they would never harvest, soldiers who had thrown down their weapons and walked until they crossed a line on a map that meant safety. I read the field report standing in the blue light of the command center. Helena stood beside me, scanning a second set. "He is building something," she said. Not a question. The reports confirmed it. Varro was not taxing his people to fund reconstruction. He was funneling every coin into a single project, converting desperate citizens into mechanical soldiers. The people who could not pay, the people who could not flee, the people who had nothing left to lose. He was offering them blue orbs, not as punishment, as recruitment. Accept the orb, serve the king, or starve in the wreckage of what used to be your home. The kingdom had become a graveyard of metal. People who had been human that morning morning, we're machine titans by noon. He thinks he can build an army faster than we can respond, I said. Helena closed her report. Her eyes were steady and cold in the way they got when she had already decided what needed to happen and was waiting for me to catch up. He cannot, she said. We did not wait for them to arrive. I launched the Apollonkaiser at dawn. Helena took Beauty 4 on a parallel course 2 kilometers to my east. Mia held Stormhawk in a high orbit for aerial reconnaissance. Mia anchored Iron Mouse at the border crossing in case anything slipped past us. Below, the Vero Kingdom looked like something had chewed it up and spat it out. Fields scorched, villages emptied, roads clogged with abandoned carts, and the litter of people who had left in a hurry. And in the distance, marching toward our border in a ragged column that stretched for miles, hundreds of machine titans and machine beasts. Former citizens, former farmers, former soldiers. Metal now. The reports had said Fritz and Cordelia were among them, revived. Again, black orbs this time, not blue, rare, expensive. Almina's had spent 2 of her limited supply on the 2 people least likely to use power wisely. I understood the strategy. It was not about Fritz and Cordelia winning. It was about them buying time, distracting me while Almina's finished whatever she was building at the South Pole. I had no intention of being distracted. Cordelia first, I said through the comlink. Fritz freezes. Cordelia grapples. If I take Fritz first, she wraps around me while I am dealing with the cold. Same playbook as always. Agreed, Helena said. I will handle Vero. 3 targets, 2 of us. The math was simple because the math had always been simple with these people. Cordelia was bigger than last time. The black orb had done what black orbs do. Her machine titan body stood 60 meters tall now. Dark silver plating shot through with veins of black light that pulsed like a heartbeat. She was ranting before I landed. Something about luxury and devotion and how the world owed her a palace. The same speech. The exact same speech she had given the first time I fought her, when she was 50 meters tall instead of 60 and had still lost. I did not respond. I did not need to. The solar furnace inside Apollonkaiser had been running at standby since launch. I brought it to full output in 3 seconds. The heat hit her before she finished her sentence. She tried to grapple. Same tactic. Wrap her arms around the Kaiser. Pin me. Let Fritz freeze us both. But she was slower than her body suggested, and I had fought this exact fight before. I stepped left. Her arms closed on empty air. The furnace beam hit her center mass at full sustained output. The black orb core inside her did not regenerate. Black orbs burn hotter, but they also burn out. She cracked from the inside. The dark silver plating warped, glowed white, and then there was nothing where she had been standing except heat shimmer and settling ash. Cordelia was gone, permanently. I felt nothing, just a task completed. Fritz was waiting. He had frozen everything within a 3-kilometer radius. The ground was glass. The air was white with suspended ice crystals. Buildings in the distance had shattered under the thermal shock, their stone walls cracked into geometric fragments. His machine titan body was darker than before, blue-black metal with frost crawling across every surface like something alive. The black orb had amplified his absolute zero ability, colder than before, denser. The air around him did not just freeze, it stopped. He saw me coming and started talking. The same grievances, the birthright, the territory, the title that should have been his, how I had stolen everything, how the world was unfair, how this time would be different. It was never different. I had fought absolute zero before. The Apollonkaiser was built for deep space. Thermal management was a core system. Space was colder than Fritz. He launched everything. The cold hit like a wall. Ice formed on the Kaiser's arms, legs, chest. The cockpit temperature readouts dropped so fast the numbers blurred. -100 million, -200 million, -500 million. Fritz was screaming now, pouring every fraction of his enhanced power into the freeze, certain that this time, the cold would be enough. I activated Cold Flash. The irony was not lost on me. My own absolute zero technique turned against the ice villain. But Cold Flash was not just cold. It was controlled cold, precise, surgical. I froze Fritz's machine titan body from the feet up, locking his joints, sealing his limbs, turning his own element against him. His frost could not touch what was already frozen harder than he could manage. He begged, just like last time. The rage collapsed into pleading in the span of a single breath. He said he was sorry. He said he would change. He said we were brothers. Then the pleading stopped and he attacked, just like last time. I punched once. The frozen body shattered. The black orb core, locked in ice, cracked and went dark. Fritz was gone, permanently. The brother who had sent assassins, raised armies, destroyed a capital, and come back from the dead twice, had finally stopped. Not with a speech. Not with a dramatic last stand. With one punch into frozen metal and a silence that felt like the end of a very long, very tedious meeting. Helena's fight was already over when I arrived. King Varro's machine titan lay in two pieces across what had been his throne room. The upper half had toppled backward into the rubble. The lower half stood upright for a few seconds before gravity caught it and it fell sideways, crashing through a wall that had somehow survived the rest of the destruction. His ornate sword, the one he had been so proud of, was embedded in the ground 10 meters away, still humming with residual energy. Helena stood Beauty 4 over the wreckage, calm, unhurried. She had not needed me for this. He talked the entire time, she said through the comm. I could imagine. Varro had always believed he was the hero of his own story. The genius king, the rightful ruler, the man who would unite the continent through sheer brilliance. He had imposed 90% taxes on people who had nothing, transformed his own citizens into monsters, and marched them toward a border defended by 4 giant robots piloted by people who had killed a dragon, a 50-meter golem, and one of Alminas's 4 generals. Helena had cut him in half with one strike. The machine body, not flesh, a standard blue orb transformation, the same tier Fritz had been in his first form. Helena had been fighting machine titans since we were 17. This was not a duel, it was pest control. 3 down, I said. The comm was quiet for a moment. Alminas is next, Helena said. The field was clear. Every proxy villain Alminas had deployed was gone. Fritz, Cordelia, Varro, the blue orbs, the black orbs, the machine titan armies. All of it swept away in a single morning because none of it had ever been the real threat. These were distractions. Expendable pieces moved across the board to buy time for the queen. And now, the queen had no more pieces. The alert came 6 hours later. A city on the southern coast. Tornadoes. Not weather patterns. Deliberate, controlled, impossibly powerful tornadoes, tearing through buildings and streets with surgical precision. The satellite feed from the moon base showed the source. A single figure standing in the center of the destruction. Massive, gleaming, female in shape, radiating energy that bent light around her body like heat off a furnace. I knew what she was made of before the scanners confirmed it. I had watched the anime. I had memorized the episode. Season 3, the final arc. The villain upgrades her body to Galaxy Alloy Alpha, the strongest material in the show's universe, and nothing the heroes throw at her makes a dent. That is Galaxy Alloy Alpha, I said. Helena looked at me. The final upgrade, I said. From the anime, the show's version of Invincible. Nothing Apollon Kaiser or Beauty 4 can do individually will damage that alloy. Every weapon, every technique, every combination, it all bounces off. The command center was very quiet. Then how did they beat her in the anime? Helena asked. I had watched that episode 53 times. I had argued about it on forums that no longer existed, in a life that no longer existed, on a planet I would never see again. The answer had always been there. They combined, I said. The 2 robots, Apollon Kaiser and Beauty 4, merge into one machine. Apollo Kaiser double tornado. The combined output exceeds Galaxy Alloy Alpha's resistance threshold. It is the only weapon in the entire show that can damage that material. Can we do that? I did not know. We had never tried. The combination sequence was not a skill I had unlocked. It was not in any manual, any tutorial, any database in the Atlantis base. I only knew the activation phrases because I had watched a middle-aged salaryman's favorite episode so many times that the words were carved into a part of my brain that even dying and being reborn in another world could not erase. I do not know, I said, but it is the only option left. Helena's hand found mine, the same way it had in the command center after the Coalition War. Not romantic, tactical, the grip of someone who had made her decision and was telling me she was ready. Then we try, she said. She was bigger than I expected. The anime had shown Alminas's final form as roughly the same size as Apollon Kaiser. The real thing towered above us, a massive female-shaped mecha, gleaming with that distinctive alloy sheen I recognized from the animation cells. Galaxy Alloy Alpha. The surface was not metal the way I understood metal. It absorbed light and reflected it back wrong, like looking at something that existed slightly outside the normal rules of physics. She was destroying the city methodically. Tornadoes spun from her hands, each one wide enough to swallow a building. The structures fell in sequence, one after another, collapsing inward as the wind ripped their foundations apart. She was not rushing, she was testing. I hit her with everything. Kaiser punch. The fist connected and bounced. No effect. I-beam. The beam splashed across her chest like water on stone. Cold flash. The absolute zero ray hit her shoulder and dissipated. The temperature did not change. Finger missiles. All 10 detonated against her torso simultaneously. She did not flinch. Rocket punch. The detached fist hit her head at full velocity. She turned to look at me, the way someone turns to look at a fly. I deployed the Apollonius Spear, the most powerful single-target weapon in the Kaiser's arsenal. I drove it into her center mass with everything the reactor could produce behind it. The spear tip touched Galaxy Alloy Alpha and stopped. Not deflected, not reflected, stopped. The energy dispersed into the alloy's surface and vanished. Unscathed. She was completely unscathed. Mia dove Stormhawk in from the east, weapons hot. The energy bolts hit Alminas's back and scattered like sparks off an anvil. Mia fired Iron Mouse's main cannons from ground level. The shells detonated against the alloy and left no mark. Alminas spoke, paraphrased through my own disbelief. She had fought the Apollon Kaiser before, across galaxies, across centuries. She knew every attack, every technique, every pilot who had tried. They had all failed. I would fail too. She hit back. A single tornado, focused and precise, caught the Kaiser and threw it backward through 2 buildings. Alarms screamed in the cockpit. Hull integrity dropped. Beauty 4 took a direct hit from a second tornado that crumpled her left wing and sent her spiraling into the ruins. Stormhawk pulled up hard to avoid a third. For the second time in my life in this world, I was losing. The cockpit was dark except for the red emergency lights and the blue glow of the remaining displays. Half the systems were in the yellow. The left arm actuator was responding at 60%. Reactor output was stable, but stable did not matter when stable meant stable and useless. Helena, I am here. Her voice came through the comm, steady and clear. Beauty 4's left wing was gone, but her reactor was intact and she was airborne. The combination, I said. Apollo Kaiser double tornado. I know the activation sequence. Every phrase, every timing, every cockpit command. It was the most beautiful thing I ever saw on a screen, and I memorized every second of it. A pause. Not hesitation. She was calculating. What do you need from me? Fly alongside. Match my speed exactly. When I start the sequence, Beauty 4's systems will receive an alignment signal. Your controls will change. New interface. Shared cockpit. I do not know what it will feel like. I do not know if it will work. It will work, she said. No question mark, no qualifier. The same voice she had used when she told me she would stand beside me the night I nearly died. On my mark, she came alongside, 2 damaged robots flying in parallel above a ruined city, trailing smoke and sparks, moving toward the most powerful being on the planet, with nothing left to try except a technique from a cartoon that a lonely salaryman had loved more than anything in his old life. I began the sequence. The words came out in order, precise and unhurried. Precise and unhurried. The activation phrases were not magic words. They were system commands, machine language rendered in human speech, because the Atlantis engineers had built their interfaces for voices, not keyboards. The Kaiser's reactor surged. Beauty 4's reactor answered. A resonance built between the 2 machines, a harmonic that I could feel in my teeth and in the base of my skull. The controls shifted under my hands. New displays opened, new readouts. A second seat materialized to my right, and Helena was there, her hands on controls that had not existed 3 seconds ago, her eyes already scanning the shared interface like she had been born to read it. Apollo Kaiser double tornado. The combined machine was not 2 robots stacked together. It was something new. The proportions were different. broader, taller. The armor plating had fused into a configuration that neither machine could produce alone. The reactor output on the shared display was not additive, it was exponential. Two systems in resonance producing more than the sum of their parts. Almina's saw it. For the first time, something changed in her posture. She straightened. She assessed. I attacked. The combined machine's fist hit Galaxy Alloy Alpha, and the alloy cracked. A web of fractures spreading from the point of impact like ice on a frozen lake. Almina's staggered. She fired tornadoes. The combined machine's shield held. She threw everything, winds that could level cities, energy blasts that lit the clouds from below. We took the hits and kept moving. Helena was beside me, literally beside me, in the same cockpit, her hands working the targeting systems while mine drove the frame. We had fought together since we were teenagers, trained together, built a kingdom together, lost and won, and lost again together. Every battle since the Dark Dragon, every machine titan, every general, every moment of trust compounding into this, the cockpit built for two. The weapon that only worked because neither of us had to be alone in it. The final attack channeled both reactors through the core weapon system. I felt it build in the machine's chest, a vibration that resonated with something deeper than engineering. Helena locked the targeting. I held the course. Almina's braced. The beam hit her. Galaxy Alloy Alpha, the invincible material, the armor that had shrugged off everything this world could throw at it, shattered. The fractures spread from center mass outward, the sheen dying as the alloy lost cohesion. And then Almina's came apart. Not an explosion, a collapse. The greatest threat this world had ever known. The shadow behind every villain, the empress who had conquered galaxies, broke into pieces that fell through the evening sky like rain. The light from the blast illuminated the clouds above the ruined city, gold and red, like sunset compressed into a single moment. Silence. Helena's hand was on mine, on the control stick where it had been during the final attack. Neither of us moved it. The shared cockpit hummed with the low idle of two reactors in harmony. Below us, the coast, the ruined city, the settling dust of Alminas's remains. Above us, a sky turning purple at the edges as the sun dropped toward the horizon. I felt it then, small, distant, a flicker of awareness at the edge of my senses, the way you feel someone watching you from across a room. A fragment of Almina's, tiny, weak, alive. Somewhere to the south, a piece of that alloy had retained something, consciousness, memory, purpose. Not enough to fight, not enough to threaten, but enough to exist. I could have hunted it, tracked the signal, followed the fragment, ended it. I did not. Not out of mercy, not out of arrogance, out of the understanding that this world would always have something waiting in the margins. A fragment, a seed, a threat that had not yet grown into its shape, and I would be here when it did. In this cockpit, with this partner, in this machine that only existed because a lonely man in another world had loved a cartoon enough to memorize its secrets. It is not over, Helena said quietly. She had felt it too. No, I said. But it is enough for today. The combined machine drifted above the coast, two reactors idling, two pilots watching the sky darken. Somewhere far to the south, two children found a strange piece of gleaming metal in a field. It was warm to the touch. They carried it home. In the cockpit, I closed my eyes. The salaryman who had watched a robot show alone at 2 a.m. had saved the world by piloting the real thing. The princess who had been called garbage had struck the final blow. Two exiles, two skills nobody wanted, one shared cockpit. I had come to this world with nothing but an encyclopedic knowledge of an anime that nobody else cared about. I was leaving this fight with an empire, a partner, and the quiet certainty that whatever came next, I had already done the thing I was born to do. The sun set, the reactors hummed, Helena's hand stayed on mine, and for the first time since I fell through a hole in the ground and woke up in someone else's body, I was not waiting for what came next. I was here. That was enough.